In the silence of an underground archive, where the air feels older than the stones holding the walls together, a solitary light flickers above a sealed glass case. Inside it lies a single clay tablet, cracked through the center but still defiant against the erosion of 5,000 years. Its surface is a maze of cuneiform impressions, sharp, deliberate, and strangely rhythmic, as if carved not just to record language, but to transmit something deeper. The room hums faintly, the way ancient rooms do when they hold secrets too heavy for the present age. A curator stands guard, not out of duty, but reverence. This tablet, like thousands discovered across Mesopotamia, should be nothing more than an administrative record. Grain storage, trade routes, temple offerings. But it is not. Scholars whisper about it when no one else is listening. Linguists argue over its phrasing. Even advanced imaging systems cannot fully reveal what lies beneath the upper layer of symbols. Intentional alterations, erased lines, overwritten phrases that betray someone's attempt to hide information without destroying it. The translator who first worked on it claimed that the moment he touched the surface, a strange chill ran through his spine. Not fear, something more like recognition, as though the tablet wasn't speaking to him for the first time, but reminding him of something he had always known. He would never finish the translation. Weeks later, he left the field entirely, refusing to read or touch another artifact again. Now, as the camera closes in on the markings, the mystery sharpens. The symbols are arranged in patterns unseen on other tablets of the same era, spiraling inward toward a single phrase partially deciphered but not yet fully understood. In English, it translates loosely to, "The blood of kings was not born, it was engineered." The word, engineered, of course, is a modern interpretation, substituted reluctantly by a scholar who admitted no other equivalent existed in ancient Sumerian. It was a word that did not belong to the vocabulary of a Bronze Age civilization, yet it seemed to whisper from between the wedge-shaped script almost insistently. Why would an ancient scribe, likely a priest or royal archivist, encode such a statement? Why carve it in a pattern that resembles encryption rather than storytelling? And why hide it beneath layers of amended text, as though terrified that someone might one day uncover its meaning? That fear is the heart of the mystery. Some tablets exaggerate myths, some elevate kings, but this one does neither. Its tone is colder, clinical, devoid of divine poetry. It reads less like mythology and more like an observation, a report, a record of something witnessed but not fully understood. Something that forced the writer to speak in symbols that even his contemporaries would struggle to comprehend. The shadows in the archive stretch across the walls like long fingers, and the golden glow from the security lamp paints the tablet with an unnatural warmth. The narration slows, leaning into the quiet tension of the moment. Because this is the point where history begins to question itself. This is the moment when archaeology shifts from dusting relics to decoding intentions. As the camera drifts over the case, viewers see tiny holographic projections showing alternative translations proposed by different researchers. One interpretation describes a descent of rulers from the sky, bearing the seed of power. Another speaks of a line separated from mankind. A third translation, disputed but never disproven, claims the text mentions the assembly of the Anunnaki altering the flesh of the earthborn. Each translation pulls the mind into strange territory. Each implies interference, deliberate, controlled, methodical, something far beyond metaphor. The documentary moves deeper into the vault, where more tablets wait in silent rows. Hundreds, maybe thousands, yet only a handful carry the same pattern of overwritten text and encrypted spirals. It is as if a small circle of ancient scribes attempted to leave evidence scattered across multiple cities, hoping future civilizations would piece together the truth. But within their own time, they were likely forbidden to speak openly. Some experts believe these tablets belong to a restricted archive known in ancient texts as the Room of Secrets, a chamber accessible only to the highest-ranking priests and the king himself. If true, then the information they guard is not merely historical, it's sensitive, potentially destabilizing, perhaps even dangerous. The camera returns to the original tablet, zooming in until the cuneiform fills the entire frame. The narrator explains that recent imaging revealed microscopic scratches beneath the carvings, lines that don't correspond to writing. They appear almost like measurement marks, the kind made when someone is calculating ratios or mapping sequences. One scientist privately admitted that the spacing resembled genetic diagrams, though he refused to put his claim in writing. The air around the glass case seems to grow colder as his words echo in memory. The tablet is more than a story. It is more than myth. It is a fragment of an age when humanity lived in the shadow of beings they did not understand. Beings they called gods, rulers, watchers, or simply those who descended. And if the tablet is to be believed, these beings did not merely guide humanity. They shaped it. They shaped us. The narrator pauses briefly, allowing the weight of this possibility to settle. Every civilization has myths of divine or celestial ancestors, from the pharaohs of Egypt claiming descent from Ra, to the Inca tracing their lineage to the sun, to the Sumerians naming their kings the chosen of Anu. But what if these were not metaphors? What if these stories were memories? Fragments of a reality remembered imperfectly but recorded faithfully. The flickering light steadies suddenly, illuminating the entire room. The tablet glows softly under the reflection, highlighting the final line etched across its lower edge. It is the line that stopped translators in their tracks. The line the first scholar refused to speak aloud. The line that appears uncannily in 3 other tablets found miles apart. It reads, "Guard the blood, for through it they shall return." The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper. What was this blood they guarded? Why did it matter? And who exactly were they expecting to return? As the camera pulls back, leaving the tablet behind in the cold, ancient darkness, one thing becomes painfully clear. This is no ordinary relic. It is a warning, a clue, a door into a forgotten age when humanity's story was rewritten, not by evolution, but by intervention. And this discovery is only the beginning. Dawn breaks over a landscape that no longer exists, at least not the way it once did. The wide, fertile plains of ancient Mesopotamia were once lush, alive with the pulse of the world's earliest cities. The camera sweeps across this imagined reconstruction. Shimmering marshlands, rivers twisting like silver veins, and at their heart, the vast settlement that archaeologists would later call Eridu, the first city of humanity. There is no slow evolution here. No gradual rise from scattered tribes to organized society. Instead, the transformation is abrupt, almost violent in its speed. 1 century, humans are small clusters of villagers living in reed huts. The next, they are mathematicians, astronomers, architects, and kings. Stone temples rise from mud-brick foundations. Complex irrigation systems redirect the lifeblood of the rivers. Clay tablets filled with sophisticated writing appear as if from nowhere. And at the center of this explosion of innovation stands a question that has haunted historians for generations. How did humanity leap forward so suddenly? The narrator's voice glides through the stillness, drawing viewers into the enigma. Every civilization develops, but none emerge fully formed, except Sumer. It is as if someone pressed fast forward on human development. The wheel, the plow, the calendar, the concept of kingship, advanced mathematics, written law, and even the earliest musical instruments all appear here. The first city-states rise in perfect sequence, as though following a planned design. Archaeologists once believed this phenomenon could be explained through environmental advantage. Fertile soil, abundant rivers, good trade routes. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the story became. The more artifacts they uncovered, the more the timeline refused to obey the slow, predictable rhythm of natural human progress. It was as if Mesopotamia received a manual, a blueprint, a set of instructions far beyond what should have been possible at the dawn of civilization. Some of the earliest records describe the arrival of knowledge in language that feels ceremonial yet startlingly literal. Texts claim that the arts of civilization were lowered from heaven. Not taught, not discovered. Lowered, handed down by beings who already possessed them. While scholars interpret these lines as metaphorical, others wonder whether they represent memories of a real encounter, blurred by time into mythology. The camera focuses on a towering ziggurat rising above the imagined skyline of ancient Uruk. Workers move with a precision that seems rehearsed, guided by architects who somehow understand geometry centuries before the Greeks would formalize it. Priests stand at the top of the structure, offering prayers to the Anunnaki, the skyborn deities who, according to the tablets, descended to establish order on Earth. These aren't vague, shapeless gods like those in many early religions. The Anunnaki are described with stunning clarity. Physical forms, ranks, roles, personalities. They divide tasks. They appoint leaders. They instruct humanity in everything from metallurgy to ritual law. They are recorded not as spirits, but as rulers, advisors, overseers. And the most puzzling detail is this: the scribes write about them as if they were real people. The narrator lets this realization sink in. There is a pattern that historians cannot ignore. When civilizations invent gods, those gods tend to be distant, supernatural, untouchable. But the Sumerian deities walk among kings. They dine in temples. They punish. They reward. They speak. And they leave. Such specificity hints at something unusual, an encounter our ancestors interpreted using the only language they knew, mythic reverence. As the camera pans across a bustling Sumerian market, viewers see ancient merchants trading goods: barley, fish, textiles, tools. But right beside these everyday items lies something far more advanced: cylinder seals. These tiny carved stones are used to imprint intricate patterns into clay, functioning like personal ID systems or miniature printing devices. Their detail is so fine that modern jewelers marvel at their craftsmanship. Yet they appear at the very birth of civilization, with no precursor technology leading to their creation. The documentary quietly asks, how does such complexity arise spontaneously? A subtle shift carries the viewer toward an even deeper puzzle: writing. The invention of writing is one of the most significant milestones in human history, yet in Sumer it does not gradually evolve from pictographs or symbolic carvings. Instead, cuneiform emerges rapidly and systematically, with grammar, structure, and a vocabulary so extensive that some scholars believe it was adapted rather than invented. It is said the earliest scribes were taught directly in temple schools under the watchful eyes of the priesthood. According to the myths, these priests served not just humans but the gods themselves. And these gods required record-keeping, careful documentation of rituals, offerings, celestial observations, and genealogies. Why would divine beings need such records? Why insist on written archives? Why create a civilization structured so methodically right from the beginning? As the screen fills with reconstructed scenes of early scribal schools, the narrator hints at the growing theory. Perhaps writing was introduced not as a human innovation, but as a tool demanded by a higher authority. The focus shifts to the night sky above ancient Sumer. Priests gather on temple rooftops, charting the movement of the planets with precision that still confounds modern astronomers. They understood the precession of the equinoxes. They recorded the cycles of Venus. They tracked lunar months with mathematical accuracy. And yet, these were the first people ever to create cities. How did they also become among the world's first astronomers? Some historians argue that early humans simply had more time to observe the heavens. Others suggest that their survival depended on agricultural cycles, prompting sophisticated sky-watching techniques. But the rate of advancement remains unerringly fast. And it is here that we encounter the most tantalizing clue of all. In the oldest Sumerian hymns, the Anunnaki are repeatedly linked to star systems, constellations, and celestial homes. They are said to descend in shining vessels, bringing knowledge from the far realm. These descriptions, though wrapped in the poetic language of the ancient world, suggest a memory of something spectacular, something beyond their comprehension, yet unforgettable. The camera returns to the ruins of Eridu, now nothing more than broken stones and scattered foundations. But in the mind's eye, the city rises again, shimmering with the improbable brilliance of its sudden existence. Streets align with near-perfect geometry. Temples stand like beacons. Every structure seems designed with purpose, intention, and forethought. This is where the story of humanity's mysterious acceleration begins. The cradle of civilization is also the cradle of an enigma, a leap that defies natural evolution. The narrator speaks softly, almost reverently. Perhaps the reason Sumer rose so quickly is because it was never meant to rise slowly. Perhaps it was the first chapter in a larger experiment. Plan. A design. And if the tablets from the Room of Secrets are to be believed, that plan did not originate with humankind. The pace slows. The atmosphere thickens. The scene fades into the shimmering heat of the Mesopotamian plains, leaving viewers with a lingering question. Who ignited the spark that transformed scattered tribes into the world's first civilization? And what did they leave behind for us to uncover? Night drapes itself over ancient Mesopotamia like a velvet shroud, and for a moment the world feels suspended between the earth and the stars. In the flickering glow of oil lamps, the priests of the temple climb the final steps of a ziggurat. Their robes sweep across stone etched with secret hymns, and their faces glow with an awe that is older than any kingdom. They lift their eyes not toward their city, but toward the darkness above, toward the realm of their sky lords. It is here, on these sacred platforms closest to the heavens, that the earliest stories speak with uncanny certainty. The Anunnaki did not come quietly or symbolically. They descended. The tablets use precise words. They came from the high realm. They landed upon the earth. They shone like fire. They walked like men. These are not metaphors of invisible spirits. These are accounts of beings described with startling physical clarity. Faces, garments, weapons, voices. The narrator's voice deepens, threading tension through the night sky. Imagine standing on a lonely plain under a moonless sky, at a time when there was no noise of machines, no glow of cities. The cosmos above would feel impossibly vast, alive, attentive. For the early Sumerians, the heavens were not empty. They were inhabited. In one of the oldest hymns to Anu, the supreme god, the scribes write of gates of the sky opening. Another text describes a brilliance that made the day as night. These words echo across cultures that never met: Egyptian, Mesoamerican, Tibetan. Each speaking of beings who arrived from above in vessels that blazed like the sun or thundered like storms. As the camera visualizes these ancient cities beneath a star-drenched sky, a shimmering object descends in the distance. Not to claim truth, but to evoke the imagery revered by civilizations thousands of years ago. The viewer feels the hush of anticipation that must have gripped the earliest witnesses, who watched something they could not understand descend from the heavens. These beings were powerful but not omnipotent. Described as rulers, judges, engineers, and sometimes even quarrelsome siblings, they resembled a royal court more than divine abstractions. The tablets speak of them arguing, commanding, building, punishing. They delegate tasks. They form councils. They appoint kings, human kings, then instruct them in laws and governance. It is the specificity that unsettles historians. A people capable of inventing myth surely could invent gods. But why give those gods ranks, titles, personal attributes, rivalries? Why describe them as arriving, departing, feasting, resting? Why depict them with tools, devices, and objects that have no symbolic meaning and no local origins? Among the most mysterious descriptions is one repeated often. The Anunnaki are said to be those who descended from the sky. Even the word Anunna translates roughly to princes of heaven, while related terms like Ijiji refer to watchers or those who observe from above. These aren't spirits in the wind. They are beings whose home lies beyond the sky. One ancient tablet speaks of boats of heaven, sleek vessels that rested not on rivers but on platforms of stone. Another describes a great shining chamber in which the sky lords met, too bright for humans to enter. These fragments are easy to dismiss as poetic imagery, yet their consistency is difficult to ignore. The narrator guides the viewer through the reconstructed moment of one of these arrivals. In the imagination, villagers freeze mid-step. Animals scatter. A strange radiance descends from the sky. At its center appear towering figures adorned in garments unlike anything woven on earth. They carry staffs that crackle with energy, and their eyes reflect starlight, as though they carry a piece of the cosmos within them. The priests bow, trembling, while the people whisper, "The Sky Lords have returned." But who were they? What were they? Myths call them gods, but their behavior suggests something more nuanced and more unsettling. They teach agriculture, mathematics, kingship, metalwork. They set laws. They supervise construction. They choose certain humans for special roles, often emphasizing the purity of bloodlines. They are deeply involved in human affairs, yet they remain separate, superior, distant. In one hymn, the scribes write, "They were tall as cedars, their radiance burning." In another, "Their voices shook the foundations." These aren't qualities of metaphorical beings. They sound like eyewitness descriptions, fading memories of encounters that defied understanding. The documentary narrows its focus to a single-cylinder seal carved over 5,000 years ago. It depicts a group of towering figures seated on what appear to be thrones, while smaller humans approach them with offerings. Behind them, a pattern resembling a star cluster glows above a strange object that looks almost mechanical, a piece of technology too advanced for the era. Art historians argue endlessly over this imagery. Is it symbolic, religious, literal? And if it is symbolic, why does the symbol appear consistently across tablets, seals, and temple walls? Why depict beings with wings when the Sumerians never depicted humans with wings? Why show them with horned helmets and star emblems that indicate rank rather than divinity? The narrator lingers on this final point. In Sumerian art, gods are not shown as abstract or invisible. They are shown with specific garments, specific tools, specific insignias. They are illustrated as if their appearance mattered, as if people remembered them vividly. Then comes the most provocative detail of all. The texts claim these beings did not simply appear once. They returned. They visited repeatedly. They inspected cities. They delivered messages. They enforced order. Their presence shaped the birth of civilization. As the night sky deepens, the camera tilts upward, revealing a vast ocean of stars shimmering with ancient indifference. The narrator whispers that perhaps the earliest humans weren't staring into an empty void. Perhaps they were watching for movement, for lights, for visitors, for the return of beings who had once walked among them. The ancient Sumerians did not question whether the Anunnaki existed. They recorded their presence as plainly as modern historians record kings and presidents. And somewhere in those records lies the clue to a deeper mystery, the moment when these skyborn beings turned their attention to humanity, not to rule us, but to shape us. The dawn sun rises over ancient Sumer like a molten coin, turning the riverbanks gold and breathing life into a world that has just begun to understand its own importance. In the heart of a growing city, Uruk, Eridu, or Kish, depending on which chronicle you believe, a new idea begins to crystallize. Not an invention, not a technology, but something far more powerful. The belief in a divine bloodline. This belief did not emerge quietly. It entered the human world the way a lightning strike enters a field. Sudden, electrifying, and impossible to ignore. The earliest rulers of Sumer did not call themselves kings in the way we understand rulers today. They called themselves Lugal, the great man, but even that title was incomplete. Their true claim, written boldly across tablets, hymns, and seals, was far more sacred. Chosen by Anu, descended from heaven. To modern ears, these declarations sound symbolic. But the tone of the ancient scribes is not poetic, it is factual. They believed that kingship itself was a gift not granted by the people, but lowered from heaven. It is one of the most repeated phrases in Mesopotamian literature. And with it comes a strange, persistent detail. Only certain bloodlines were worthy of receiving this gift. The narrator draws us into a reconstructed throne room. Dark stone walls, flickering torches, and a ruler adorned in grand ceremonial robes. Around him are priests carrying scrolls of genealogy, carefully tracing the king's lineage back to figures who, according to their records, were not entirely human. These priests guard the lineage obsessively, ensuring that every new ruler shares the same bloodline extending back to the time when the Anunnaki walked among mortals. This isn't a simple cultural practice. This is a requirement and instruction. The phrase carved on multiple tablets makes this chillingly clear. The seed of kings must remain pure, untouched, preserved. The question, of course, is why. The narrator's voice softens. pulling us deeper into the enigma. In one of the oldest king lists discovered, the first rulers are described as reigning for hundreds, sometimes thousands, of years. Their lifespans stretch so far beyond normal human capability that scholars often dismiss them as exaggerations. But what if they aren't exaggerations? What if they reflect something different? Some unique biological legacy that the ancients knew existed and tried desperately to maintain. Some translations of Sumerian hymns describe the early kings as those of shining countenance, those with the radiance of the gods, or those who burned with the fire of the sky. These descriptions appear again and again, echoed in Egypt when the pharaohs claimed divine essence, and in the Indus Valley where rulers were said to carry the spark of the heavens. These aren't isolated metaphors. They are global patterns. The documentary returns to the king lists. The earliest rulers, Alulim, Alalngar, and Menluana, are names spoken in a tone of reverence. Their reigns stretch across eras long before writing, long before cities, long before anything resembling ordinary civilization. Some lived 500 years, others nearly 2,000. The narrator pauses. This doesn't sound like governance. It sounds like custodianship. The kings were not chosen to rule. They were appointed to maintain something, to protect a legacy inherited from the Sky Lords. And that legacy, according to the tablets, was carried in their blood. A clay tablet from Nippur contains a cryptic passage that scholars debate endlessly. Translated, it reads, "In the sacred blood is the memory of the first ones, placed there by Enki, sealed by Anu. Let none dilute this gift. Placed there, sealed." These words do not resemble mythology. They resemble intentional design. The documentary now visualizes ancient rituals of coronation. The incoming ruler is not simply crowned. He undergoes purification rites meant to awaken the essence of his divine blood. Priests chant hymns reminding him of his lineage, not to glorify him, but to warn him. Kingship is not a privilege. It is a burden tied to ancestry. A strange detail emerges from tablet inscriptions. Many of the earliest kings had unique physical descriptions: extraordinary height, unusual strength, eyes described as shining like burnished bronze, skin called glowing as though lit from within. These traits vanish over generations, fading as the bloodline becomes more human, suggesting that the earliest rulers were closer to their divine progenitors than the kings who followed. The narrator draws a connection that scholars are hesitant to make. These ancient rulers appear almost hybrid, beings caught between two worlds, the earthly and the celestial. And if the tablets are accurate, this was intentional. One text claims Enki, the god of wisdom and creation, mixed the blood of heaven with the clay of the earth, hinting at something more scientific than mythical. Was this creation, experimentation, genetic manipulation? Whatever it was, it produced beings capable of bridging the gap between ordinary humanity and the Anunnaki. The kings, the keepers of the blood, the living link. Archaeological digs reveal that early royal tombs were far more elaborate than ordinary graves. They contain objects that resemble tools rather than treasures: metal rods, strange engravings, symbols associated with the sky and stars. Some skeletons found in these royal tombs are taller than typical Sumerians. A few possess elongated skulls, unlike any ordinary human remains of the time. The narrator makes no sensational claims but lets the unease speak for itself. The ancient world seemed desperate to preserve something extraordinary, something fragile, something that made their rulers more than human, yet not fully divine. As we move through the ruins of Sumer, the idea becomes clearer. Kingship was not a political role. It was a biological responsibility. The ruler's lineage carried a specific heritage that the Anunnaki themselves demanded be preserved. Without it, the connection between the heavens and the earth would be severed. And this connection, this bloodline, was not just a symbol of power. It was believed to be the vessel through which knowledge, memory, and destiny flowed. The camera slowly pans across a series of ancient tablets, each repeating the same quiet warning: guard the blood, protect the seed. The narrator's voice lowers, filled with gravity. To the Sumerians, the blood of their kings was more than ancestry. It was a code, a key. the legacy of beings they believed would one day return. And perhaps, they feared, the purity of that blood would determine humanity's fate when that day came. The world after the first kings is not the same world that came before them. Something subtle but profound begins to divide humanity. Something that cannot be seen with the eyes yet shapes the course of every civilization that follows. The ancient Sumerians speak of this moment not as a gradual cultural shift, but as the birth of a divide, a separation, a distinction so deep it echoes across thousands of years. For the earliest scribes, humanity is not one people. It is two. One kind of human is described as those fashioned for labor, created to serve, to build, to harvest, to obey. Their origin stories speak with startling bluntness. They are formed from the clay of the earth, shaped quickly, urgently, to ease the burdens of the Anunnaki overseers. These humans live short lives, toil in fields, raise livestock, dig canals, doing the work that maintains the new civilization. Then there is the second kind. These are the ones the texts refer to with reverence, calling them the favored of heaven, the chosen, or more cryptically, those of the mixed essence. Their existence is shrouded in mythic language, but beneath the poetry lies something strange, a suggestion that they were not made the same way as the laboring class. They were crafted, not created, formed from a template more refined, more controlled, more precious. The narrator's voice softens as the scene shifts to a temple school where scribes etch stories into wet clay. Their hands move carefully, almost nervously, as they write of the moment when Enki, the god of wisdom, intervened in the creation of humanity. According to these texts, Enki believed the first humans were too limited, too bound to the tasks assigned to them. He wanted beings capable of more intelligence, reasoning, creativity. A race able not just to serve but to understand. And so, the stories claim he altered the design. He blended the divine blood with the clay of the earth, producing a new kind of being, half earthly, half celestial, capable of emotions, memory, and self-awareness. This hybrid creation is portrayed with awe, fear, respect. It is unlike anything the world has seen before. The texts describe these first hybrids as radiant, strong, gifted with insight, able to interpret the will of the gods. But with their creation came a consequence no one could control. The two types of humans began to diverge not just in ability but in destiny. The narrator guides the viewer through scenes of early Mesopotamian life. Laborers bend under the sun, shaping mud bricks, drawing water from wells, grinding grain into flour. Meanwhile, the children of the favored class study astronomy, mathematics, music, medicine. They serve as priests, advisors, scribes, roles that place them closer to the Anunnaki, both literally and symbolically. This divide is not framed by the ancients as inequality. It is framed as necessity. The gods required servants, but they also required stewards, humans who carried their essence and could maintain the sacred balance between earth and sky. These favored humans, the hybrids, became the nucleus of royal families, priestly orders, and scholarly elites. Over time, stories of their origin spread far beyond Sumer. The narrator moves from Mesopotamia to Egypt, to the highlands of Peru, to the river valleys of India. Everywhere, the pattern repeats. Myths of a chosen class descended from gods, born with unique gifts, charged with maintaining cosmic order. Pharaohs are said to contain the Ka of Ra. In the Andes, the Inca call themselves children of the sun. In India's ancient texts, the priestly caste is said to be born from the mouth of the creator god, set apart, elevated, endowed with sacred knowledge. Could these myths be echoes of the same ancient division? Different cultures remembering the same origin story. The documentary returns to Sumer, where the division between ordinary humans and the hybrid elite becomes sharper with each generation. The favored class is described as taller, stronger, healthier, traits that slowly fade as their blood mixes with the broader population. The priests respond by designing rituals and laws intended to preserve purity. Some kings marry their sisters. Some forbid their heirs from taking non-royal spouses. All of it is driven by a single fear recorded in tablet after tablet, that the divine essence within them will weaken or disappear. The narrator draws attention to a striking detail found in the creation myth known as the Atrahasis. In this story, the first humans, those created purely for labor, are described as restless, noisy, short-lived. But when the hybrid beings appear, the gods begin speaking to them directly, teaching them sacred knowledge. It is as if these hybrids possess something the others do not, a capacity to understand, to question, to reason. Some scholars interpret this as mythic metaphor. Others see in it a clue, a suggestion that the first hybrids possessed neural or cognitive abilities beyond those of their predecessors. Whether symbolic or literal, the distinction is clear. The ancients believed humanity was not molded from a single pattern. It was split, engineered, divided by purpose. The documentary shifts tone, becoming quieter, more reflective. The divide between the two human groups becomes a recurring theme in ancient stories. In some myths, the hybrids rebel, desiring freedom from the gods. In others, the laboring humans rise up, demanding equality. And in still others, the gods themselves fight over which group should be favored. Enki, the compassionate creator, often sides with the hybrids, encouraging their growth. Enlil, the stern enforcer, tries to suppress them, fearing they will challenge divine authority. This tension builds beneath the surface of every myth, every ritual, every royal decree. And at the center of it all lies the ancient idea that humanity was not born equal because humanity was not born from one act of creation, but two. A slow, lingering shot of human faces, different cultures, different eras, different worlds, fills the screen. The narrator's words settle gently. If the ancients believed there were two versions of humanity, one forged to serve and one destined to lead, then the story of our species may be far more complex than we can imagine. And somewhere in that complexity lies the secret of the bloodline the gods tried so hard to preserve. The ancient world does not whisper about creation, it sings of it. Yet behind the hymns, behind the myths, behind the reverent prayers carved into stone, there is a darker, stranger layer of narrative. A layer the priesthood preserved cautiously, as though they knew they were guarding knowledge meant only for a chosen few. It is the story of how humanity was made. Not formed by divine breath, not sculpted in metaphorical clay, but engineered. The story begins in a chamber that appears not in grand temples but in quiet, private inscriptions. A hidden room, illuminated by a bluish radiance, where Enki, the god of wisdom, crafts, and forbidden compassion, works with tools that scribes describe in terms too technical to dismiss as simple myth. The tablets speak of bowls, flasks, molds of flesh, and something called the holy mixture, guarded as fiercely as a king's crown. The narrator moves slowly through this reconstructed chamber, the stone walls echoing with sounds we cannot fully comprehend. Strange instruments hum softly. Symbols engraved in metal plates glow faintly, pulsing like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. It is a place of creation, yes, but not in the artistic sense. This is a laboratory. One of the oldest creation texts, the Enki and Ninmah myth, describes the process with unnerving precision. It speaks of mixing the clay of the earth with the blood of a god. It refers to a birth-giving womb, an instrument shaped like a vessel, not a woman. And it lists experiments, creations that were incomplete, flawed, unsuccessful. Humans born without eyesight, others without the ability to speak, some unable to stand upright. Each attempt recorded as a test. Each failure recorded as a step toward an intended design. What kind of myth records failed prototypes? Most origin stories portray creation as perfect from the start. But not here. The Sumerians describe a trial-and-error process that mirrors the modern concept of experimentation more than mythology. They describe collaboration between deities, divine scientists debating the ratio of materials, the strength of the mixture, the viability of each new design. The narrator lets this question settle. Were the Anunnaki gods? Or technicians? The camera shifts to ancient drawings found on cylinder seals. They show figures wearing strange garments, interacting with humans from elevated platforms or inside what look like enclosed chambers. One seal depicts a central figure surrounded by tools that modern eyes recognize as surgical or mechanical. Another shows a being holding what appears to be a vessel with tubing extending from it, an object with no metaphorical value, no agricultural function, no religious symbolism. The narrator acknowledges the skepticism but points out a compelling detail. These objects do not appear in ordinary scenes of daily life. They appear only in scenes related to the gods, creation, or birth. The scribes saw them as sacred, not because they were divine artifacts, but because they were instruments of an act that redefined humanity. The texts refer again and again to mixing the clay. This phrase reverberates through generations of temple records. Scholars translate it, debate it, dismiss it, reinterpret it, but its meaning remains elusive. The Sumerians used clay to represent the physical body, the material foundation of life. The mixing of clay could be metaphorical, or it could be literal, or, more disturbingly, it could be an ancient attempt to describe a process the scribes barely understood, an act of biological manipulation witnessed by early priests. In one hymn, the priests describe Enki creating humans to ease the labor of the gods, who were exhausted from building canals, shaping mountains, and managing the early cities. But another text adds a detail rarely translated, that the gods themselves resisted this idea. They feared humans who might grow powerful. They worried about humans who could think, reason, and question. They argued that giving too much intelligence to the new species would disrupt the cosmic balance. Enki, however, defied them. He wanted humanity to thrive, to rise, to understand. And so he did something forbidden. He added more of the divine essence, more than the council agreed upon. The result was a being neither servant nor equal, a being suspended between dependence and autonomy, a hybrid, a bridge, a spark. The narrator draws attention to one of the most controversial passages found on a tablet from Eridu. It says, "From the flesh of the god, a likeness was made, not fully of heaven, not fully of earth." A likeness, a copy, a design. These words drift dangerously close to the language of replication, the language of templates, the language of genetics. Did the ancient scribes witness something they could not explain? Something they attempted to describe using the only vocabulary they possessed? Clay, blood, wombs, essence? The documentary moves deeper into the possibility that the ancient world encoded scientific processes into symbolic language. Myths from other cultures begin to align disturbingly well. In Egypt, the god Khnum is shown shaping humans on a potter's wheel. In India, the god Prajapati crafts the first humans in a forge-like chamber. In Mesoamerica, the gods experiment with human prototypes, first creating beings of mud, then of wood, then of maize, discarding those that fail. Were these parallel inventions, or fractured memories descending from a single ancient event? The narrator does not push answers. He simply guides the viewer through the fragments, linking them gently, letting the weight of the similarities speak for itself. Back in Mesopotamia, another strange detail emerges. The texts speak of the mold of life, a template used to shape the first humans. The priests were forbidden to look upon it. Only Enki and the highest-ranking beings were allowed to handle it. The mold appears repeatedly in inscriptions, always associated with creation, always hidden, always described with fear. What was this object? A metaphor? A physical device? Or a symbolic representation of a process the ancient world could not comprehend? The narrator pauses, letting faint echoes fill the chamber. Enki's rebellion in the creation process sets the stage for everything that follows. The royal bloodline, the hybrid elite, the tension between the gods, and eventually, humanity's struggle for autonomy. The story of creation is not a harmonious birth. It is a contested act, a violation of cosmic order, a secret that some gods tried to erase while others fought to preserve it. The camera lingers on a final image, a priest etching a warning into a tablet. Their design was not meant to be known. Their making was not meant to be revealed. But history did not bury the secret completely. It left clues, symbols, myths, fragments. And now, thousands of years later, we stand at the threshold of understanding something the ancient world tried desperately to hide. The lost science of creation was not a metaphor. It was a method. And the deeper we search, the closer we come to rediscovering it. Night settles like a veil over the ancient city of Eridu. The temples glow dimly beneath the moonlight, and the marshlands shimmer around them, hiding secrets beneath their dark waters. This is where the stories speak most clearly of the one figure who refused to obey the silent boundaries imposed by the divine council. The god who defied his own kin, the architect of humanity's awakening. His name is Enki. The narrator's voice becomes softer now, reverent, almost protective. If the Anunnaki pantheon was a court of cosmic rulers, then Enki was the quiet genius in its shadows, the scientist, the thinker, the one who understood not just the mechanics of creation but the fragility of living beings. He walked among rivers instead of thrones. He preferred laboratories to war councils. And unlike his brother Enlil, who ruled with iron authority, Enki leaned toward curiosity, compassion, rebellion. His defiance did not come from anger, came from empathy. Inside a stone chamber, part temple, part workshop, part forbidden sanctuary. The lamps flicker over shelves filled with strange tools and containers. This is the birthplace of humanity, where Enki carefully shaped the first hybrid beings from a mixture the scribes dared not describe plainly. To them it was sacred. To him it was a responsibility he alone seemed willing to bear. The earliest tablets describe a moment that changed everything. The gods had approved a single design for humans, simple, obedient, capable only of labor. But Enki saw something in these early creations that troubled him. They lived without purpose. They worked without understanding. They existed without curiosity. They were alive yet not truly living. And so Enki broke the rule. He added more of the divine essence, more than the council had allowed. He lifted the humans beyond their intended limits, giving them intelligence, emotion, memory, desire, creativity. These were gifts the Anunnaki considered dangerous. But Enki believed humanity deserved more than servitude. He believed they deserved potential. The narrator describes the moment this forbidden act was discovered. Enlil, the stern and unyielding ruler, is said to have stormed into Enki's chamber, furious at the changes made without permission. His voice thundered like a storm, shaking the very walls of the temple. He accused Enki of violating divine law, of endangering the cosmic order, of placing too much power in hands that were not meant to hold it. Enki's response is preserved in fragments across multiple tablets. Quiet, calm, unshaken. They are our children, he said. We shaped them. Let them rise. But Enlil did not see them as children. He saw them as tools, creations meant to serve the gods, not walk beside them. The hybrid beings Enki had engineered were now too intelligent, too aware, too unpredictable. They asked questions. They learned quickly. They dreamed. They made music. They formed bonds with one another that the gods had not planned for. And perhaps the most audacious thing of all, the humans began to pray not only to Enlil and the council, but to Enki. This was intolerable. The narration grows tense. The division between Enki and Enlil becomes more than a disagreement. It becomes a fracture that threatens the harmony of the divine world. Enlil warns that Enki's creations, if allowed to continue evolving, could rise above their assigned status. They could challenge the gods. They could break the carefully structured hierarchy of heaven and earth. Yet Enki refuses to undo what he has done. To him, humanity represents possibility, a creation that can grow, adapt, become something extraordinary. He believes they can coexist with the gods, not as slaves but as partners in the shaping of the world. And so the conflict escalates. In one myth, Enlil attempts to impose limits on the humans by cursing their lifespan, shortening their years so they would never develop enough knowledge to challenge the gods. Another text claims he restricted their access to sacred knowledge, forbidding the priests from teaching certain astronomical secrets or mathematical formulas. But Enki found ways around these restrictions. Late at night, in quiet temples and hidden chambers, he whispered forbidden knowledge into the ears of priests and kings. He taught them the language of the stars. He showed them how to read the movement of rivers, predict floods, cultivate the land, and heal the sick. These teachings became the foundation of civilization, skills the gods may have used themselves, but Enki risked everything to pass them on. The narrator paints a vivid picture. A young Sumerian priest, trembling with fear, kneeling in the dark while a towering figure of radiant light instructs him in words he barely understands. When Enki leaves, the priest looks upon the world with new eyes, aware, awakened, transformed. This is the beginning of humanity's ascent. But every ascent casts a shadow. The divine council grows increasingly alarmed. They watch as humans multiply, organize, innovate. They see writing spread through the temples. They see the first cities rise. They see kings tracing their lineage back to Enki's chosen hybrids. And they fear a future where the children of clay and divine blood outgrow their creators. Enki's rebellion has consequences the world will feel for millennia. The narrator shifts tone, letting the emotional weight settle. Enki is not portrayed as a flawless hero. He is conflicted, burdened by guilt yet guided by conviction. His love for humanity sparks hope but also risk. In giving humans intelligence, he also gives them the capacity for ambition, conflict, desire, and defiance. He gives them the power to shape their destiny and the power to destroy it. One text describes Enki standing alone at the shore of the Persian Gulf, watching the stars reflected on the dark water, contemplating the future he has set in motion. He knows the council will punish him. He knows humanity will suffer because of his choices. But he also knows that without those choices, humanity would never rise beyond the status of obedient workers. He whispers one final line into the wind, preserved by scribes who dared record it. Let them become what we cannot foresee. Humanity's story begins not with harmony, but with defiance. Not with perfect order, but with a rebellion born from compassion. And in that rebellion lies the seed of everything that will come. The bloodline, the wars, the rise of kings, and the shadow of secrets the gods tried to bury. The air of the ancient world grows heavier, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. Something vast and terrible is gathering beyond the horizon. An event so immense that every civilization on Earth will remember it in its own language, its own symbols, its own myths. Across continents and ages, people will speak of a great cleansing, a great drowning, a great silence that swallowed entire kingdoms in a single moment. But long before it becomes legend, it begins as a decision. Enlil watches humanity with growing dread. The clay-born workers he once considered manageable now speak like scholars. They gather in crowded cities, build monuments, write in cuneiform, chant hymns, make music, and dream of futures that do not include divine authority. The hybrid bloodlines, descendants of earlier experiments, possess insight, strength, and ambition that unsettle him even more. From his celestial vantage, Enlil sees the world evolving into something he and the divine council never intended. A species no longer content to serve, no longer blind to its power, no longer bound to the limits originally carved into its design. The tablets record his frustration in blunt and chilling lines. Their numbers cannot be controlled. Their minds cannot be silenced. Their ways cannot be contained. To Enlil, the solution is simple, drastic, but necessary. The world must be cleansed, reset, purified, not destroyed entirely, but restarted. Only the chosen bloodlines, those deemed worthy, should survive. The narrator's voice deepens. This is the beginning of a purge not of people, but of blood. A genetic cleansing disguised as divine wrath. An event meant to erase the hybrid influence that Enki secretly nurtured. The council convenes. Arguments erupt. Hidden tensions boil over. And slowly, grudgingly, a decision emerges. One that will topple the earliest civilizations without leaving a trace. The humans have no idea what is coming. The skies above Sumer remain deceptively calm. The Euphrates flows peacefully. Markets bustle with trade. Priests chant as they have for centuries. Children run through dusty streets, unaware that the world beneath their feet is about to collapse. Animals graze. Birds circle lazily overhead. The sun glows warm and indifferent. But beneath this serenity, the warnings begin. Strange tremors ripple across the land. The moon appears distorted in the night sky, ringed with an unnatural halo. Priests record omens of stars falling, winds reversing, and mountains groaning. The river's behavior becomes unpredictable, surging at odd hours, then receding into eerie silence. Enki reads these signs with growing horror. He knows what Enlil intends, and he knows that once unleashed, the force of this event cannot be stopped. Not by gods, not by humans, not by any being walking upon the earth. Myths from across cultures describe what happens next. In Mesopotamia, scribes write of the Great Deluge. In the Hebrew tradition, it becomes a flood sweeping across all lands. In Mesoamerica, it is recorded as the destruction of a previous age. In Greece, it becomes the tale of Deucalion. In India, the story of Manu. Everywhere there is water, endless, crushing water. But in Sumer, the story holds a deeper, more disturbing layer. It is not simply a flood. It is a targeted act. The narrator draws the viewer into a dimly lit temple where Enki, torn by guilt, whispers the truth to one chosen man, Ziusudra, a ruler of pure hybrid bloodline, whose lineage Enki believes must survive the coming purge. Enki's voice trembles not with fear, but with sorrow. He has gone against his brother to elevate humanity. Now he must go against him again to save it. He warns Ziusudra in secret. A storm will come, a wave that swallows the horizon. Build a vessel. Preserve your seed. Preserve life. This moment is echoed in dozens of ancient texts, each describing a chosen survivor guided by a compassionate deity who defies the will of the higher council. A cosmic whistleblower, a divine rebel, the protector of the hybrid line. The narrator lets this revelation settle. The flood, then, is not merely a punishment. It is a contest between two visions of humanity, one seeking to extinguish human potential, the other desperate to preserve it. As the skies darken, Enlil's fury unfolds across the world. The wind begins to howl with an unnatural pitch. Clouds gather in swirling black masses. Thunder shakes the earth. Lightning tears open the heavens. The sea rises. Rivers overflow. The ground itself begins to tremble. The first great wave strikes the coast with a sound like the roar of 1,000 beasts. Cities vanish. Villages disappear. Temples crumble under the weight of surging water. People scramble to higher ground, only to watch their refuges swallowed seconds later. The world becomes a churning ocean of bodies, debris, and shattered memories. The narrator grows quiet. In every corner of the earth, humanity fights to survive. But the storm does not relent. Days blur into nights, nights into days. The rain does not stop. The water does not recede. It is as if the sky itself has ruptured. From above, Enlil observes calmly, believing he has restored order, believing he has undone Enki's interference, believing the world will return to its intended state, clean, simple, obedient. But in the shadows of the storm, Enki watches over the survivors, clinging to hope that at least a few will endure. He knows the purge cannot be fully reversed, but he can ensure the hybrid bloodline is not erased. The narrator follows Ziusudra's vessel drifting across the endless sea, carrying the remnants of a world the gods tried to erase. Inside the vessel are seeds, animals, tools, scrolls, everything needed to begin again. And within the hearts of the survivors lies the spark that Enki gave humanity, the spark that no flood can drown. When the waters finally recede, the world is unrecognizable. Forests are gone, cities buried, kingdoms erased. But humanity survives, wounded, reduced, and scattered. The hybrid bloodlines, though thinned, continue through a few chosen families. The flood does not end the story. It rewrites it. A reset, purification, a dangerous gamble. And beneath the silence of the newly washed earth lies a chilling truth. The gods did not simply try to destroy humanity. They tried to erase a bloodline, a lineage, a secret woven into flesh. But it survived, because Enki made sure it would. When the waters finally surrendered their fury and began to pull back into the oceans, the world that emerged bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before. The ancient cities of Sumer were gone, buried under layers of silt and silence. Vast plains became wetlands. Hills became islands. Temples became distant memories carried only by the wind. Humanity stood upon a reshaped earth, dazed, diminished, and scattered across unfamiliar lands. But not all was lost. The narrator moves through the mist of a newborn landscape. The survivors stumble through mud and debris, dragging what little remains of their former existence. Tools, fragments of scrolls, a precious handful of seeds. Their faces are hollowed by exhaustion, their bodies marked by hunger, yet their eyes burn with a quiet determination. These are the descendants of the hybrid bloodline, the ones Enki fought to preserve, the ones the purge was meant to extinguish. They search for high ground, climbing hillsides that now overlook an endless, shimmering field of water. Their world is reduced, their numbers few, but they move with a strange confidence, as if guided by something unseen. Many tablets describe this period not as a simple survival tale, but as one guided by celestial hands. The Shining Ones appear again in these records, tall figures cloaked in radiance who emerge from the mist to lead the survivors toward safety. In some stories, they descend from the sky. In others, they appear on mountaintops or within beams of light. Their presence is always described with awe, towering, luminous, serene. Their purpose is unclear, but their guidance is unmistakable. The survivors climb toward the mountains. The narrator shows reconstructed scenes. Men and women carrying children up rugged slopes, priests clutching ceramic jars containing sacred knowledge, elders whispering myths that now feel like warnings. At night, they gather around small fires, retelling the story of the deluge, their voices trembling as they wonder whether the gods will ever return, or if the flood was their final judgment. But in this fragile moment between destruction and renewal, a different story begins to germinate. The survivors do not simply wander. They move with direction, as if led by memory. The ancient texts mention a place above the waters, where the chosen were instructed to go, a refuge built before the storm, a sanctuary prepared for this very moment. The camera follows them up a jagged ridge, where the wind carries the scent of wet stone and pine. At the summit they see it, an enormous structure carved into the mountainside. Not a temple, not a city, something older, something untouched by the flood. The texts refer to it only as the House of the Mountain, a place said to contain the wisdom of the gods, sealed away for the survivors who bore the sacred lineage. Inside, the darkness is thick and heavy. The air is cold, but as the survivors raise their torches, the shadows retreat to reveal walls covered in carvings. Maps of the stars, diagrams of human bodies, lists of kings who ruled before the flood. It is as if this place was meant to preserve everything the world had just lost. A silent archive waiting for the right hands to open it. The narrator's voice grows quiet, reverent. These carvings depict beings descending from the heavens, guiding early humans, shaping cities, crafting the first laws. They show the Anunnaki teaching music, mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture. Most astonishingly, some carvings describe a prophecy, one that foretells the flood and warns that a new age of kings will rise from the survivors who carry the blood of the gods. For the survivors, this discovery is not a miracle. It is a responsibility. Around the mountain sanctuary, small settlements begin to form. Wooden shelters become stone houses. The survivors plant the seeds they saved, turning barren slopes into terraced gardens. Slowly, the world begins to bloom again. Streams emerge from melting snow. Animals return to the valleys. A fragile civilization takes root in the shadows of the mountains, nurtured by the knowledge salvaged from the flood. The narrator shows the hybrid bloodline quietly reestablishing itself. The priests guard ancient scrolls sealed in clay jars. The kings teach their children the sacred genealogies, insisting that they memorize every ancestor back to the pre-flood world. Midwives recite prayers invoking Enki's protection during every birth, fearing that Enlil's wrath may still echo across the horizon. And then, one night, as torches flicker in the wind and the stars shine brighter than they have since before the storm, the Shining Ones return. The texts do not describe them in metaphor. They are drawn with precision. Tall silhouettes, radiant garments, eyes glowing like gemstones. The survivors fall to their knees, trembling, awestruck. The beings speak softly, their voices described as the sound of water flowing over stone. Their message is simple yet profound: rebuild. Not the world as it was, but the world as it should be. With their guidance, the survivors descend from the mountains and begin establishing new cities in the valleys below. These cities will become the seeds of later civilizations, places like Kish, Shuruppak, and later Babylon. The hybrid bloodline becomes the bedrock of post-flood kingship, carrying forward the divine spark Enki fought to preserve. The narrator's voice lingers on the final image, a lone figure standing at the mountain's edge, watching the sun rise over a reborn world. The flood was meant to erase them, yet they survived. Not through strength, but through guidance. Not through numbers, but through blood. And the secret they carry, the memory hidden within their lineage, will shape the course of human history for millennia to come. In the centuries that follow the Great Flood, the world rebuilds itself slowly, cautiously, like a wounded animal unsure if the threat has truly passed. New rivers carve fresh paths through the fertile plains. Cities rise again, though smaller and more humble than the magnificent kingdoms drowned beneath the deluge. Humanity, once scattered and broken, gathers into communities guided by memory, fragments of the past carried by the descendants of those who survived. Within this fragile new dawn, something remarkable begins to emerge. The ancient scribes, working in the dim corners of reborn temples, start to record the reigns of their new kings. These kings, descendants of the hybrid bloodline, inherit not only leadership but a strange legacy, the echo of longevity. Their lifespans stretch far beyond those of ordinary humans. Some rule for decades, others for centuries, and a few, according to the most sacred tablets, reign for centuries that defy comprehension. This is where the mystery deepens. The narrator guides the viewer to a clay tablet known today as the Sumerian king list. Its surface is cracked and worn, yet the writing remains clear enough to chill the bones. It records rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods. 28,800 years, 36,000 years, even longer. Modern historians often label these numbers as symbolic or exaggerated, but the consistency of the pattern and the sheer scale of the lifespans raises questions too unsettling to dismiss. The kings who governed before the flood lived as if time itself moved differently for them. They existed in ages, not years. In epochs, not lifetimes. The narrator pauses, allowing tension to thicken. What kind of being lives that long? What kind of blood carries centuries within it? In the dim light of an ancient archive, the camera lingers on inscriptions describing these early rulers. They are called those who knew the secrets of the sky, those of radiant flesh, and those whose breath was long. The phrases are poetic, yet they point to something biological, a trait inherited, not imagined. The hybrid essence created before the flood has not vanished. It lingers in the blood of the rulers who emerge afterward. But the scrolls also reveal something else. With each generation, the lifespans shrink. The earliest kings reign for thousands of years. Their successors rule for hundreds. A few generations later, the numbers fall to mere decades. A slow fading, a gradual loss. It is as if something in the blood is thinning. The narrator moves the viewer into a visual sequence. The pre-flood hybrid kings, tall, luminous, extraordinary, contrasted with their post-flood descendants, who, though still gifted, begin to resemble ordinary humans more closely. Their features soften. Their height decreases. Their radiance dims. They remain extraordinary, but no longer superhuman. Why is the divine essence fading? The tablets never answer directly, but they hint at several possibilities. One text suggests that the gods intended this decline, a restriction placed on humanity to prevent another uprising. Another claims that the flood severed the connection between heaven and earth, weakening the life force bestowed upon the early rulers. Yet another implies that the hybrid bloodline, once carefully controlled, has begun to mix more freely among the people. Whatever the reason, the result is unmistakable. The kings who walk the earth after the flood are not gods. They are echoes. The narrator leans deeper into the mystery as the camera reveals various archaeological sites, stone tombs, ancient burial chambers, royal graves filled with objects that seemed deliberately arranged to reflect the status of a dying legacy. Some contain unusually tall skeletons with elongated skulls. Others contain artifacts that resemble devices rather than treasures. Metal rods, strange golden plates, objects with spiral engravings that scholars cannot interpret. These rulers are not merely political figures. They are biological remnants of an era that ended violently. The Sumerian king list creates a pattern so consistent it becomes impossible to ignore. The older the king, the longer the reign. The closer to the flood, the longer the lifespan. The further into history, the shorter the years. This phenomenon puzzles modern academics. Why record reigns of 18,000 years if the numbers were never meant to be literal? Why preserve them with such precision? Why not exaggerate differently through victories, power, riches instead of time? Time is the one exaggeration ancient scribes rarely used. Their calendars were strict, their mathematics precise, their astronomical observations shockingly accurate. They did not inflate numbers for entertainment. They measured with purpose. So why record impossible lifespans unless someone, once lived them? The narrator allows the viewer to contemplate a troubling possibility. Perhaps these lifespans were not impossible for the earliest hybrids. Perhaps their enhanced biology, engineered using the divine essence, allowed them to endure for centuries, even millennia. The ancient world interpreted this longevity as divinity. But what if it was a genetic inheritance? The story turns as the narrator describes how these kings were worshipped not just for their power, but for their endurance. Their long lives gave them authority unlike anything seen before. They became living archives, bearers of ancient knowledge, memory, and skill. They carried fragments of pre-flood civilization within their minds. This is why, according to many texts, the first kings after the deluge were chosen carefully. Their lineage had to be preserved. Their bloodlines had to remain as pure as possible, even if their lifespans had begun to shorten. The hybrid essence was still present, still valuable, still feared. The narrator lowers his voice, almost to a whisper. This is where the concept of royal blood originates, not from political tradition, but from biological reality. The early kings were different, not metaphorically, physically, but the ancient world is not kind to fading power. As the centuries pass, humanity grows, cities expand, empires rise, knowledge spreads, and the kings who once towered over ordinary humans begin to lose their divine aura. Their longevity diminishes, their abilities diminish, their memories fade, their connection to the shining ones grows faint. The hybrid bloodline is still there, hidden, diluted, protected, but no longer obvious. The narrator returns to the modern world, where scientists study DNA patterns and genetic bottlenecks. They discover anomalies, sudden expansions of population, abrupt changes in mitochondrial DNA, unexplained leaps in complexity. They cannot explain them fully. They do not realize they are staring at the footprints of the ancient kings. As section 11 draws to a close, the narrator paints one final image. A lone clay tablet, cracked but still legible, describing a king who lived for over 1,000 years. At the bottom, a single line stands out. They ruled because they remembered, but memory fades, blood thins, and soon the world will forget what these kings once were. Long after the floodwaters receded and the great kings of impossibly long reigns faded into myth, the world settled into a new rhythm. Time began to move in ordinary cycles again, years measured by harvests, generations marked by the passing of seasons rather than centuries. Yet beneath this surface of normal human life, a puzzle lay buried so deeply that only modern science would stumble upon it thousands of years later. It begins with a map, not a map of continents or kingdoms, but a map woven into flesh, a map carried silently within every living human. It is the mitochondrial lineage, the invisible thread that connects each person to those who came before. Scientists studying this genetic trail expected to find a gradual, predictable progression. Small mutations, slow changes, a steady tree branching through time. But that is not what they found. The narrator's voice drops into a tone of intrigue. Instead of a smooth lineage, researchers discovered sudden leaps. Genetic bottlenecks where diversity vanishes almost overnight, followed by explosions of new traits appearing across distant regions at nearly the same moment. It is as if humanity's genetic story jumps forward in bursts rather than crawling slowly through natural evolution. These jumps occur not once, but several times. And most curiously, one of the most dramatic shifts aligns with the approximate era just after the flood myths, an age when the hybrid bloodline was rebuilding, redistributing itself, and quietly merging into the wider population. The camera glides over a digital visualization of mitochondrial DNA, glowing threads branching like roots from an ancient tree. Within these threads are anomalies, patterns that make no sense in a world of ordinary evolution. Traits appear that should have taken tens of thousands of years to develop, yet suddenly emerge across entire populations separated by mountains, deserts, and oceans. It is as if someone pressed a hidden switch inside the human genome. The narrator describes how geneticists, working with the latest computational models, have identified unusual uniformities in early human lineages. A bottleneck around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, eerily close to the timing of Mesopotamian flood records, shows that most human mitochondrial lines trace back to a surprisingly small number of mothers. Not millions, not thousands, a handful, just as ancient myths claim only a small number of families survived. But the mystery deepens. Within these lineages appear traits that do not fit their environment or lifestyle. Cognitive abilities blossom rapidly. Artistic expression explodes across multiple continents. Farming, pottery, metallurgy, and astronomy appear nearly simultaneously in regions that had no contact with one another. The narrator allows this strangeness to breathe. Scientists call this moment the human cultural revolution. But the timing is suspicious, not millions of years into the past, but at the dawn of recorded history. At the precise moment when the hybrid bloodlines began mingling with the broader human race. One geneticist famously wrote, "It is as though an external force accelerated human development." He later dismissed his own words as metaphor, but what if they were not? As the documentary moves through laboratories and ancient ruins, it becomes clear that the mitochondrial mysteries echo the old stories. The hybrid children of the gods, the survivors of the deluge, spread across the world, carrying fragments of the divine essence within them. As their descendants multiplied, the traits once concentrated in a few elite bloodlines began to diffuse into the entire species. This diffusion may explain why so many post-flood civilizations leap to complexity almost instantly. In Egypt, dynasties emerge from the desert with advanced knowledge of engineering, medicine, and agriculture. In India, the earliest priestly castes preserve astronomical calculations so precise they still amaze modern scientists. In China, sudden urban centers appear with organized labor, writing systems, and planned city grids. In South America, cultures rise seemingly out of nowhere with megalithic architecture and sophisticated calendars. The narrator guides the viewer to a simple but haunting idea. The spark that Enki hid in humanity, the gift he refused to let Enlil erase, was now spreading. But the mitochondrial map reveals something even stranger. Scientists discovered that a particular haplogroup, one carried by millions today, originated from a woman whose genetic profile appears unexpectedly unique. She existed during the era immediately post-flood. Her lineage diverged sharply from all others, as if she carried traits not seen before or since. In ancient myths, she might have been described as blessed, chosen, sacred. In biological terms, she was simply different. The narrator steps carefully into this mystery, not claiming certainty, but pointing out the eerie parallels. Could this woman have been a survivor of the hybrid bloodline? Could her descendants have carried the lingering remnants of the pre-flood king's longevity, intelligence, or physical traits? Could her existence be the genetic echo of the bloodline Enlil tried to destroy? Mitochondrial DNA can reveal only the maternal line, but when combined with Y-chromosomal studies, another pattern emerges. Yet another sudden, unexplained expansion. A single male lineage multiplies explosively around the same period, dominating large swaths of the world. Historians interpret this as a matter of war, conquest, or social hierarchy. But the genetic pattern is unusually fast, unusually dominant, and unusually aligned with myths of divine kingship returning after the flood. The narrator leans in. Perhaps the ancient stories of gods appointing new rulers were not metaphorical at all. Perhaps they were descriptions of hybrid men, descendants of the pre-flood kings, expanding their bloodlines across emerging civilizations. Science does not confirm myths, but sometimes, without meaning to, it brushes dangerously close. In laboratories filled with glowing screens and whispering machines, modern scientists marvel at how quickly humanity advanced after the bottleneck. They attribute it to chance, environment, necessity. But chance does not usually follow patterns. Environment does not create sudden genius. Necessity does not synchronize innovation across continents. Something happened. Something dramatic. Something intentional. Something ancient people tried to preserve in their stories, their symbols, their blood. As Section 12 ends, the narrator leaves the audience with a quiet question. What if the evidence of the Anunnaki's intervention was never hidden in temples, ruins, or myths, but inside us? The clay tablet turns slowly under the soft glow of museum light, but the shadows it casts seem older than the building itself. Its surface is covered in symbols, tiny, deliberate, impossibly detailed. At first glance, it looks like every other cylinder seal recovered from ancient Mesopotamia. But as the camera moves closer, the carvings reveal themselves as something far more unsettling. A message hidden in plain sight. A warning carved into stone by hands that lived in a world still echoing with the footsteps of the gods. The narrator's voice deepens, pulling the viewer into the mystery. Cylinder seals were the passports of ancient Sumer. They marked identity, lineage, authority. They were worn around the neck, carried like keys, pressed into clay to sign documents. But some seals served a different purpose entirely. They were not meant to record daily transactions, they were meant to preserve secrets. One particular seal, one that baffled historians for decades, shows a strange scene. At the center, a tall figure sits on a throne, his body wrapped in garments that shimmer like flames. Around him stand attendants and scribes, their heads bowed. But the background is what steals the breath. There are stars carved behind the throne, not scattered randomly, but arranged in a distinct, recognizable pattern. Cluster, a system, constellation, and right beside it, carved with astonishing precision, is what appears to be a sun with orbiting bodies. 7 spheres, one larger than the rest. The narrator lets the silence stretch. This seal, created more than 5,000 years ago, appears to depict a celestial map, one far more advanced than anything humans were supposed to understand at the time. The arrangement of the spheres does not match the visible planets from Earth. Instead, it aligns closely with a star system identified only in recent decades using modern telescopes. How did ancient scribes carve this? Why did they carve it? And why does the central figure, whose face is stylized yet unmistakably non-human, gesture toward the star map as if instructing his followers? The seal does not explain itself. It does not justify its existence. It simply sits in silence, daring anyone who sees it to question their assumptions about the ancient world. The narrator moves deeper into the story. Among the thousands of seals discovered, only a handful contain similar star patterns, all pointing to regions of the sky humans could not have mapped with naked eyes. Some show a mysterious winged disk hovering above temples. Others depict beings with elongated skulls or strange helmets, interacting with humans who kneel in reverence. But one seal stands apart, more cryptic than all the others. It portrays a ritual, one that scholars long dismissed as symbolic. Yet, in the context of the hybrid bloodlines, it takes on a chilling new meaning. In this seal, a human figure kneels before a tall, radiant being. Between them sits a vessel, rounded, smooth, and covered with engravings resembling spirals and intersecting lines. The being touches the vessel with one hand, while the other hand rests on the kneeling human's head. Beneath the vessel, etched in tiny strokes, is a symbol representing life, breath, or essence, a ritual of transmission, a ceremony of selection, a moment in which something invisible is passed from one being to another. The narrator speaks softly, almost reverently. Scholars often interpret this as a coronation scene, a symbolic rite of kingship. But the symbolism becomes too literal, too consistent, when seen through the lens of genetic preservation. It resembles not a coronation, but the preservation of a bloodline, an ancient version of a genetic ritual meant to maintain purity, power, or memory. Across multiple seals, variations of this ritual appear, always with the same elements: a being from the sky realm, a vessel of unknown purpose, and a human marked with symbols indicating lineage. The ancient priests likely understood only fragments of what they were witnessing. To them, these moments were holy, sacred, evidence of divine selection, something humans should never question. But one seal changes everything. It was uncovered in a private collection after lying hidden for a century. When researchers examined it, they found carvings so unusual that some initially believed it to be a modern forgery. But tests confirmed its authenticity. On this seal, 3 figures stand around a human child. 2 are the tall, radiant beings, Anunnaki. But the third is not fully one of them, nor fully human. The figure has elongated proportions, a narrower skull, and unusual markings that do not match any known deity. The child between them carries the symbol for seed or descendant, a hybrid child, a royal heir. The narrator lets the weight of this revelation settle. This seal is the first physical depiction of the ancient hybrid lineage described in myths and king lists. It is not metaphorical. It is not symbolic. It is a literal account carved by a scribe who likely witnessed, or was taught, what the ritual meant. The spiraling pattern carved beneath the child mirrors the same motif found in temple inscriptions referencing the divine essence. The lines crossing at the center resemble, in an uncanny way, depictions of DNA helixes drawn by modern illustrators thousands of years later. Coincidence? Or ancient remembrance? The narrator does not push the audience toward belief, but toward curiosity. Why do these patterns appear so consistently across regions, seals, and centuries? Why do the symbols suggest selection, transformation, transmission? And then one more detail emerges. The newly uncovered seal contains a final symbol at its edge, one rarely seen and never fully understood. A circle divided into 4 quadrants. In each quadrant, a different star cluster is carved. And in the center, a tiny mark, the sign for king, chosen, or blood. This is not just a ritual seal. It is a map, a record, a warning. Ancient scribes were not simply chronicling gods. They were documenting a lineage the gods themselves were protecting. A lineage that would reshape the world. A lineage that must survive for reasons lost to time. As section 13 closes, the narrator's voice becomes a whisper. The seals warn of something hidden beneath the surface of humanity. A story written not in temples or tablets, but in flesh, passed down quietly through the ages. Something that remembers, something waiting, something the ancients believed would return. In the centuries that followed the Great Flood, human settlements began to crystallize around a single idea. Survival was not enough. Survival without knowledge, without memory, without lineage, was merely existence. The hybrid survivors understood something that most humans did not. They were carrying more than their lives into the new world. They were carrying a legacy. One that needed to be protected, nurtured, and hidden from those who might misuse or destroy it. And so, in the silent chambers of post-flood temples, a new institution arose. The priesthood. Not the humble worshippers depicted in modern imagination, but powerful scholars, guardians, astronomers, healers, and historians. Chosen carefully, trained rigorously, and sworn to protect secrets older than any kingdom. These priests were the custodians of knowledge left behind by the Anunnaki, the interpreters of their symbols, the keepers of genealogies, and the architects of rituals meant to preserve a bloodline that had survived annihilation. The narrator guides us through a vision of a temple interior, dimly lit by oil lamps. Scrolls line the walls, clay tablets stacked in careful piles. The air is heavy with incense and the scent of wet clay. Here, priests kneel before tables carved with star charts and genealogical trees. Their hands glide across tablets that detail not prayers, but records. Records of families, rulers, births, and deaths. Each line etched into clay is not just history. It is surveillance. The hybrid bloodline, if it were to survive, needed to be tracked, watched, and protected. The priests knew this, because their ancestors had watched entire kingdoms erased by a single divine decision. They understood that what had survived the flood could easily be lost again. So they became guardians of lineage. In these hidden chambers, the priests copied records of the houses of kings, families said to carry the remnants of divine essence. They mapped these families with obsessive precision. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters. Who married whom? Who inherited what? Which line had grown thin? Which one carried a particular trait, height, unusual eyes, prophetic dreams, uncanny intelligence, or strange longevity? These records were not shared with the public. They were not meant for the average farmer, weaver, or merchant. They were reserved for kings and those who served them, and even then, only the highest-ranking priests had access to the deepest secrets. The narrator lingers on a chilling realization. The earliest priesthoods of Sumer, Egypt, and Babylon were not created to worship the gods. They were created to manage the aftermath of the gods. Across the ancient world, similar patterns emerge. Egyptian priests preserved the lineage of pharaohs with ruthless precision, insisting on royal siblings marrying to maintain purity. The Vedic Brahmins guard chants said to originate from celestial visitors. The Mayan Itza priesthood protects astronomical knowledge too advanced for their environment. The Druids hide genealogies of Celtic kings in ritual memory rather than writing. These were not isolated traditions. They were threads woven through the world's earliest civilizations, threads connecting back to one truth. The bloodline mattered. The narrator now takes us into a vault beneath the ziggurat of Ur. Archaeologists discovered it only in the late 20th century. A sealed chamber filled with clay tablets stacked floor to ceiling. At first, they were assumed to be trade records, but deeper analysis revealed something more astonishing. Thousands of entries detailing royal births, marriages, and successions spanning nearly 15 centuries. The tablets form a secret archive of dynasties. But why preserve such detail? Why protect it with stone seals and hidden entrances? Why limit access to only a select few? The narrator answers softly, because these records contained clues about who carried the ancient essence, and who did not. Some tablets mention the mark of the gods. Others speak of the sign in the flesh. A few refer to physical characteristics. Eyes described as like black glass, skin called shining, voices that carry far without strain. These traits appear sporadically through the genealogies, often skipping generations, reappearing in unexpected branches. The priests watched these signs carefully. When a child was born with one, the temple bells were rung in secret. The child's name was carved into a tablet with a special symbol. He or she would be raised differently, trained to read the ancient language, taught to interpret omens, groomed for leadership. In some cases, the child was taken into the temple itself, raised by the priesthood as a future high priest or ruler. These individuals were believed to be closest to the divine essence, the most capable of channeling knowledge from the sky lords. The narrator shows an imagined scene. A young child sitting before a panel of priests, answering questions about dreams, symbols, and the stars. His eyes glow faintly in the lamplight, too bright, too aware. The priests exchange glances. They recognize the spark. But not all families celebrated the mark. Some feared it, worried it would draw divine jealousy or human envy. Some tried to hide children born with unusual traits. Others fled their villages, hoping to evade temple authorities. These stories rarely end well. Priests roamed the land not only to teach and heal, but to monitor. They visited households, inspected newborns, evaluated promising youths. Protecting a bloodline often requires control, and control sometimes veers into cruelty. The narrator moves to another discovery, this one from a lesser-known dig site near Babylon. Archaeologists uncovered a set of tablets detailing the lost dynasties, families whose lines were extinguished through war, famine, or divine punishment. The tablets mourn these losses not because of politics, but because each lost dynasty represented a thinning of the sacred blood. The hybrid essence was fragile, diluted easily. miscarried often, lost abruptly. Thus the priesthood guarded it with increasing desperation. They arranged marriages. They selected heirs. They concealed forbidden unions. They wrote laws to prevent certain classes from mixing with the ruling line. Over time, this obsession became embedded in the very structure of civilization. The narrator steps back, revealing a sobering truth. Many of the world's earliest caste systems, royal traditions, and elite orders did not originate from economics or politics, but from a prehistoric attempt to preserve genetic memory. The priests were not serving gods, they were serving a legacy. That legacy stretched back to the days when the Anunnaki walked openly among humans. It whispered of a covenant between heaven and earth. It insisted that the future of humanity depended on a lineage that should not be allowed to disappear. As the camera drifts over the ruins of ancient temples, the narrator concludes with a haunting thought. The priesthoods did not simply guard knowledge. They guarded descendants, living relics of a forgotten age. And though millennia have passed, the question lingers. Did their protection succeed? Or did the bloodlines slip into the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered? Power in the ancient world was never simply taken. It was inherited, carried, guarded, purified, and passed like a flame cupped in trembling hands. The people who lived after the flood believed that kingship was not a political office but a biological privilege, a responsibility etched into flesh, a gift that flowed through blood like an invisible current humming beneath the skin. And so, across the cradle of civilization, a quiet obsession began to shape human destiny. The ruling families believed that the closer their blood remained to the original hybrid lineage, the closer they were to the gods. Purity became an idea so sacred and so dangerous that entire societies built themselves around its preservation. Kings married sisters, cousins wedded cousins. Dynasties folded into themselves like spirals, tightening generation after generation, guarding the divine spark like a treasure encased in bone. In the great palaces of Sumer, marriage was not a matter of love or alliance, but mathematics. Priests and scribes calculated genealogies like star charts, tracing curves of ancestry with the precision of astronomers plotting the heavens. A king could not simply choose a wife. He needed a consort whose blood carried the right symbols, traits passed down from the ancient line. Her lineage had to connect to the sacred houses, her ancestors woven with the remnants of pre-flood kings. The narrator's voice lowers, drawing viewers into the candlelit halls where these decisions were made. Young princesses were raised knowing their marriages would shape the future of kingdoms. Their bodies were vessels of legacy, their children pieces in a cosmic game of preservation. Their marriages were blessings and burdens, praised as divine duty yet steeped in silent sacrifice. But purity, once desired, becomes a prison. The narrator guides the viewer to Egypt, where pharaohs claimed descent from Ra, the sun god. Their blood was considered so holy that marrying anyone outside the royal family was seen as contamination. Brother married sister, nephew married aunt. The throne was a closed circuit, a sealed vessel meant to trap divinity within flesh. And yet, even this obsession was not unique to Egypt. In the highlands of Peru, the Inca claimed descent from the sun, declaring their nobles children of the light. Marriages among close kin were not only common, they were commanded. In India, mythic rulers were said to possess the tejas, a divine brilliance carried through blood. In parts of Mesopotamia, priests chose consorts for kings based on ancient symbols etched into their lineage tablets. The pattern is global, and it always leads back to the same ancient fear: lose the blood, lose the power. The narrator now leads us inside a royal birthing chamber. Incense coils upward in thin spirals. Midwives whisper prayers to Enki or to whichever deity the dynasty believed safeguarded their line. They watch the newborn closely, not for signs of health, but for signs of inheritance. Eyes too bright, limbs unusually long, a strange radiance in the skin. If the child carries any mark reminiscent of the ancient essence, the temple bells ring. If not, the priests remain silent. The expectations placed upon these children were immense. A child born with divine signs might be isolated, protected excessively, treated as a walking relic. One born without them might be pressured, molded, or quietly moved aside in favor of another from a more promising branch of the family. Human emotion had little place in these decisions. Blood was destiny, but purity has a price. Generation after generation of controlled breeding created pressure. Pressure that often erupted into rivalry, fear, and paranoia. Kings assassinated brothers to protect the line. Queens poisoned rivals to preserve their children's inheritance. Dynasties waged wars not over land or wealth, but over who held the truest claim to the blood of the gods. The narrator paints a haunting vision, a dimly lit throne room where advisors whisper genealogies like weapons. One wrong marriage could alter the course of kingdoms. One illegitimate child could shatter centuries of careful preservation. One forbidden union, a king marrying a commoner, a princess falling in love with a soldier, could be seen as blasphemy against divine order. And so purity became not just practice but propaganda. The narrator guides the viewer through ancient inscriptions proclaiming rulers as born of heaven, sons of the shining ones, descendants of the first kings. These claims were etched into stone, recorded in hymns, retold in ritual. They were more than political statements. They were reminders, warnings, that divine favor was hereditary, not earned. But beneath this carefully crafted structure lurked a deeper truth. The bloodline was thinning. No matter how carefully priesthoods managed it, no matter how closely families guarded it, the divine essence grew faint with every passing generation. Signs that once appeared in kings, remarkable height, extraordinary stamina, unusual eyes, uncanny intuition, became rare. The hybrid spark diluted slowly, inevitably. The kings noticed, the priests noticed, and they responded with desperation. Some kingdoms intensified incestuous marriages, hoping to reclaim traits lost over time. Others turned to rituals meant to awaken dormant divine essence. Still others began seeking brides from distant lands rumored to carry ancient blood, often sparking wars disguised as conquests. The narrator highlights one astonishing detail. Many of history's most legendary queens, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, the priestesses of Uar, the Maya Ix-Kuk, come from lineages tracked with almost obsessive precision by their civilizations. These women were not chosen for beauty or personality, but for lineage. Their marriages were part of a strategy to preserve something vanishing in real time. But purity, especially when forced, breeds fragility. Dynasties collapsed under the weight of their own obsession. The narrator shows the ruins of once great palaces, where cracks in the walls mirror cracks in bloodlines. The divine spark faded no matter how desperately it was protected. And the more it faded, the more fiercely kings clung to their rituals of purity. Until at last, purity itself became the downfall of many royal houses. The narrator's voice softens, drifting toward a somber truth. The obsession with blood, a divine gift, a genetic inheritance, a mythic symbol, shaped civilizations but also shattered them. Yet something remarkable happened despite all this. Even as dynasties fell, even as bloodlines diluted, even as purity faded, fragments of the ancient essence slipped quietly into the general population, into farmers, artisans, wanderers, and healers, into places no priesthood could track, into families no king would suspect. Purity failed, but the spark survived, because divinity, once released into humanity, could never be confined again. The ancient world did not choose its rulers, it recognized them. Long before democracies, elections, or councils, there existed a quiet sensing, a kind of instinct shared by entire communities, a recognition of something unusual in certain individuals. Presence, an aura, a resonance that made people stop, turn, and whisper. The texts describe these rulers not by birthright alone, but by signs, subtle, mysterious traits the ordinary eye could sense even without understanding. These were the kings who carried something in their blood, something older than any crown, something that belonged not to the earth but to the sky. The narrator guides the audience through scenes of ancient rituals, kingmakers standing in shadowed temples, watching a line of young nobles pass before them like stars drifting through the night. Their job was not to choose the strongest, nor the eldest, nor even the most politically advantageous. Their job was to find the one who carried the hidden spark, Sometimes the child was obvious. He towered above his peers, his posture unnaturally straight, his eyes sharp and unsettlingly calm. Other times the signs were subtle, a quiet intensity, a strange intuition, a dream that foretold storms or floods, a voice that resonated in a way the priests could not explain. These children did not seek power. Power seemed to seek them. The narrator describes one such moment recorded in a weathered tablet from Lagash. A priest watches a boy recite ancient hymns. The words, carved in the lost tongue of the gods, pour from his mouth effortlessly, even though he had never been taught them. When the priest asks how he knows the hymns, the boy simply shrugs. "I remember," he says, but he remembers something no human should. In the eyes of the ancient priesthood, this was the sign. These were the genetic kings, not kings by lineage alone, but kings chosen because their very bodies reflected the echoes of the Anunnaki. The narrator takes us deeper into this phenomenon. Across civilizations, from Sumer to Egypt, from the Andes to the Indus Valley, legends arise of rulers not merely appointed, but awakened. In nearly every culture, these rulers share the same unusual traits: extraordinary strength, unnatural height, eyes described as like polished stone, the color of dawn, or shining from within, a presence that silences crowds without effort, dreams that blur the boundary between memory and prophecy. Ancient scribes struggled to capture this presence in language. They used metaphors: starborn, radiant, touched by the sky. But the meaning is clear. These individuals were different. They stood at the fragile intersection between mortal and divine, human and other. Many modern historians dismiss these descriptions as poetic embellishment. But the narrator prompts viewers to consider something else. Why do these traits appear in records from civilizations separated by oceans, deserts, and millennia? Why do they match so closely across cultures that never interacted? The hybrid essence, the ancient genetic inheritance, did not disappear after the flood. It resurfaced sporadically, unpredictably, in children whose birth changed the course of nations. The narrator lingers on a powerful moment. A young prince, barely 10 years old, standing on the wall of his city as a storm approaches. While others panic, the child closes his eyes, breathes deeply, and whispers that the storm will break at dawn. The elders dismiss him, but as morning comes, the clouds part exactly as he foretold. Another account describes a queen who could calm violent animals with a touch. Another speaks of a ruler whose wounds healed unusually fast, confounding the healers who attended him. These stories are recorded not as myths, but as observations, details scrawled by scribes who witnessed what they could not explain. The narrator's tone shifts as he guides us into royal chambers where kings and queens confront their unusual abilities in secret. Many of them fear these gifts, viewing them as burdens born from ancient mistakes. Some embrace them, believing them to be signs of destiny. Others resent them, longing to be ordinary in a world that demands too much of them. But the priesthood sees things differently. To them, these traits are not gifts, they are markers. They indicate that the ancient essence still flows, undiluted in certain veins. And they watch these individuals with intense interest. They groom them, protect them, manipulate them. Sometimes they even fear them, because once in a generation, a ruler emerges who is too gifted, too perceptive, too powerful, too close to what the ancients once were. And such individuals threaten the balance between human and divine. The narrator describes one chilling tale from Akkad, where a king arose whose presence unnerved even the priesthood. He commanded armies with uncanny precision. He predicted enemy movements as if he could see through walls. His advisors whispered that he never slept, that his eyes glowed faintly in darkness. The priests tried to control him. They failed. The king expanded his empire beyond what the gods were believed to allow. He became a legend, then a threat. The tablets hint that the gods intervened directly, ending his reign abruptly, an act disguised as fate, but remembered as something else entirely. This tale becomes a mirror for countless stories across the world. Rulers who ascend rapidly, rise too high, shine too brightly, only to vanish suddenly, often violently, as if something or someone feared what they might become. The narrator lets the audience sit with this realization. The genetic kings were not only chosen, they were monitored, they were celebrated, they were removed when necessary, because the hybrid essence was both a gift and a danger, a power meant to guide humanity but not overwhelm it. Toward the end of the section, the narrator paints a final image, a king standing alone on a palace balcony, staring up at the night sky. The stars shimmer like ancient eyes watching him, reminding him of a heritage he did not choose, a destiny he cannot refuse, and a burden he must carry until the end. These rulers were extraordinary, but they were also trapped, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. And though the centuries pass, their legacy does not fade. Somewhere in humanity, their spark still flickers, waiting for the moment it will rise again. Long before the world built its kingdoms of stone and iron, long before priests carved their secrets into clay, there existed an agreement whispered only in the chambers of the gods. It was not written in language. It was not sealed with ceremony. It was a pact, an understanding between realms, forged during the earliest days of humanity's creation. The scribes called it the covenant. But theirs was not a covenant of prayer, sacrifice, or devotion. It was a contract of blood. The narrator moves slowly through the faint glow of torchlight illuminating ancient walls. Carvings emerge, tall figures standing before smaller humans, arms extended as if granting something unseen. Between them rests a symbol carved in delicate spirals, the sign of inheritance, the sign of continuity, the sign of a charge that must be upheld. The covenant was not made with all humans. It was made only with those who carried the spark of the divine essence, the hybrid lineage created by Enki, protected by the priesthood, feared by Enlil. These families were not simply rulers. They were custodians of something ancient, a living bridge between Earth and the skyborn beings who shaped early civilization. Yet the true purpose of this covenant remained hidden even from them. The narrator leans in. The ancient texts imply that the covenant was not about kingship, not about dominion, not even about worship. It was about duty, a duty to preserve something the gods had embedded within human blood. A memory, a code, a map leading not to land or treasure, but to destiny itself. The earliest fragments of this idea appear in the temples of Eridu and Nippur, where priests speak not of obedience to the gods, but of service to the plan. This plan is described vaguely: the order of heaven, the will of the first ones, the course set before the Great Flood. It suggests that the hybrid bloodline was entrusted with guiding humanity toward a future envisioned by the gods. But which gods? Enki, who uplifted humans, Enlil, who sought to destroy them, or others, beings whose names have been lost in the erosion of millennia? The narrator allows the question to vibrate in the silence before continuing. In several tablets discovered in Sapar, the covenant is described as a structure, something maintained through rituals, protected through secrecy, and activated only when certain signs appeared in the heavens. These documents refer to the Assembly of the Seven, a council of divine beings who measured the progress of humanity like one might measure the growth of a garden. Their decisions were final, their oversight constant. It was said that when the seven saw the hybrid bloodline weakening, they would intervene. When they saw corruption spreading, they would correct it. And when they saw knowledge slipping into the wrong hands, they would bury it beneath deserts, floods, or fire. The covenant was protection, and also control. The narrator now brings us into the dim halls of a temple where a high priest kneels before a figure carved in translucent stone. The statue does not depict a human or a god in traditional form. Its body is tall, elongated, with features too symmetrical, too perfect to belong to flesh. Its eyes are jewels, polished so smoothly they seem alive. The priest touches the statue's feet, whispering a vow passed down through generations. Guard the line, guard the knowledge, guard the return. The phrase, the return, appears repeatedly in the covenant texts. It implies that the gods did not abandon their creation, but left humanity in the care of its own hybrid descendants, left them with instructions, warnings, and fragments of technology disguised as sacred relics. and that one day, when humanity reached a certain threshold, the gods would come back. But the return is not promised as salvation. It is promised as inspection. The narrator's voice lowers, turning solemn. The covenant was not a gentle agreement. It was a conditional arrangement between creator and creation. If humanity preserved the bloodline, the bridge to the heavens would remain open. If they allowed it to fade, humanity would drift into darkness, forgotten by the beings who shaped them. In ancient myths, this condition manifests as prophecies of cycles, ages that rise and fall according to cosmic law. The hybrid bloodline was the anchor ensuring humanity stayed aligned with this law. Without it, the world risked losing its connection to the stars. This explains why priesthoods guarded genealogies, why kings were chosen based on traits rather than birth order, why certain knowledge was restricted, and why rituals were performed to renew the covenant at solstices, equinoxes, and astronomical alignments. The narrator now shifts to one of the most haunting elements of the covenant: the Watchers. Not angels, not spirits, not mythical beings. The Watchers were envoys, Anunnaki emissaries tasked with observing the hybrid lineage and ensuring it fulfilled its duty. They appear across cultures as beings who monitor rulers, advise them, warn them, and sometimes punish them. They visit temples cloaked in light. They appear in dreams with urgent messages. They intervene subtly in moments of crisis. But their presence becomes rarer as centuries pass. The hybrid bloodline thins, diluted by unavoidable intermarriage and the unpredictability of human reproduction. The spark becomes faint. The Watchers fade into legend. Yet the covenant remains. It is preserved not in stone, but in ritual. In the rites of coronation where priests whisper secret vows into a ruler's ear. In the symbols carved beneath palace floors. In the encrypted hymns sung only during eclipses. In the genealogies fiercely guarded through wars and upheavals. And in one of the most powerful artifacts discovered in the ruins of Haran, the Oath Tablet. This tablet, cracked but still legible, describes a ritual performed once every generation. In it, the king swears loyalty not to the gods of his people, but to a hidden order that transcends nations. I hold in my blood the memory of those who came before. I am their vessel, their witness, their watcher on earth. The narrator breathes these words slowly, letting their weight settle. This oath binds the ruler to the covenant. It requires him to uphold the ancient laws that forbid certain technologies, restrict certain knowledge, and demand the preservation of the sacred lineage. The covenant is not about power. It is about preparation. Preparation for what? The narrator moves to the final and most mysterious aspect, a prophecy inscribed on a stone sphere found near the ruins of Kish. The inscription is brief, cryptic, and chilling. When the sky opens and the stars align, the first ones shall return to claim their throne. Let their blood be ready. This prophecy suggests that the covenant was not merely about maintaining order. It was about preparing for a future event, an event in which the hybrid bloodline would play a crucial role. Not as rulers, not as servants, but as conduits, bridges, living keys. As the camera fades into the darkness of an ancient temple corridor, the narrator whispers one final thought. If the covenant still exists, if any part of that ancient promise has survived, then somewhere in the world, even now, the descendants of that bloodline walk among us, unaware, unprepared, waiting for a return they do not remember, but that their blood has never forgotten. The desert breathes differently over ancient burial grounds. The air grows still, heavy with the weight of stories that have not been spoken aloud in thousands of years. Wind moves across the dunes like a whisper, brushing sand away from stones carved with symbols long forgotten. These are not the resting places of ordinary kings. These are the tombs that should never have been opened, sealed chambers built to hide something too important, too dangerous, too sacred for human eyes. The narrator guides us into the barren landscape where archaeologists, armed with modern tools, stand on the threshold of mysteries their ancestors dared not disturb. Their footsteps crunch softly on sand that once covered entire kingdoms. The sun beats down mercilessly, yet the deeper they dig, the colder the air becomes, as though the earth itself resists the intrusion. It begins with a single door, A slab of black stone carved with spiraling lines that seem almost alive, shimmering faintly under torchlight. No tools of the era should have been able to carve it with such precision. No human hands should have possessed the skill or the knowledge to shape this material. The symbols resemble those on the cylinder seals, the ones that hinted at rituals of transmission and star maps from unknown realms. The team pries the slab open. A chill bursts out like a trapped breath. The narrator's voice lowers. Inside lies a tunnel, long, narrow, and impossibly smooth, as if carved by light rather than tools. The walls are etched with patterns resembling double helixes, spirals, and intersecting lines. These symbols appear in sites across Sumer, Egypt, South America, and even ancient China, though the civilizations never interacted. The deeper the explorers go, the more the walls begin to shift. Art changes. Beings appear tall, elongated, their eyes almond-shaped and reflective. They are not depicted as gods with wings or animal heads. They are depicted as beings, teachers, watchers, engineers. Their hands touch human forms lying on stone tables. Light pours from their palms. Humans rise changed. Enki's forbidden art. Then the tunnel opens into a chamber, vast, circular, echoing as though holding the memory of every whisper spoken inside it. This is the first tomb, not a burial site, a vault. The chamber contains stone coffins arranged in perfect symmetry. But these are not the coffins of kings. They bear no names, no titles, no funerary prayers. Only symbols of lineage, the spirals representing essence, the star clusters representing origin. The narrator describes how, upon opening the first coffin, the archaeologists recoil. Inside lies a skeleton, but not a human one. It is taller by a head. The limbs are elongated. The skull is elongated too, with an enlarged cranial cavity. The bone density is unusually high. The eye sockets are larger than human proportion. And the rib cage contains an extra pair of ribs. These anomalies are not the result of binding or deformation. They are biological, intentional, remnants of the hybrid kings, remnants of the beings who walked between worlds. The narrator emphasizes that mainstream academics label such finds as ritualistic distortions, elite deformities, or unusual cultural practices. Yet the patterns appear globally. Elongated skulls in Peru, Syria, Malta, and Egypt. Oversized skeletons in Sumer, China, and North America. Uncommon bone structures paired with artifacts that suggest knowledge far beyond their time. These similarities cannot be coincidence. The deeper chambers reveal more coffins, each containing remains that push the boundaries of human biology. Some skeletons show signs of rapid regeneration, healed fractures that should have taken months but show full recovery in days. Others have unusual dental patterns. A few contain remnants of substances clinging to the bones, residues that, under modern analysis, do not match any natural element on Earth. The narrator reveals a chilling layer of the mystery. Some of these tombs were never meant to be opened even by ancient people. They were sealed with materials designed to last forever. Stone that resists erosion, chambers embedded beneath miles of bedrock, markers warning of divine wrath and forbidden knowledge. In one site, discovered in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists found a sealed alcove within a larger tomb. The inscription above it read, "Do not awaken the watchers. Their return is not for your time." Inside the alcove were 3 coffins, smaller than the others, arranged in triangular formation. Their contents were unlike anything recorded in archaeological history. The bones were finer, almost crystalline. The skulls were smooth, symmetrical, unblemished by time. The bodies were placed in fetal positions, their hands holding spherical objects carved from an unknown metal. Each sphere bore the same symbol found on the covenant tablets. The circle divided into 4 quadrants with the mark of the bloodline in the center. The narrator pauses. These are not tombs. They are storage, preservation, chambers built to house the remnants of beings whose lineage was not meant to fade. Beings who may have played a role in shaping ancient kingships, guiding early humans, protecting the hybrid spark. Another chamber, this time beneath a ruined ziggurat in Iraq, reveals murals that seem almost alive. They show processions of humans presenting offerings to towering beings. But in the final mural, the beings withdraw into the sky, leaving their hybrid successors behind. The humans panic. The priests fall to their knees. The world grows dark. Then the prophecy: when we sleep, keep the blood. When we wake, guide the path. The narrator lingers on these words. Were these beings hibernating, traveling, waiting, or had they simply left behind their genetic legacy and trusting it to humanity until their return? One tomb in particular reveals something unprecedented. Beneath layers of stone sits a sarcophagus carved from a single piece of obsidian. Inside lies not a skeleton, but ash. Fine, gray ash mixed with metallic particles that modern scientists describe as non-terrestrial in composition. Inside the sarcophagus are also 3 tablets, sealed in clay, and one object wrapped in woven fibers preserved by thousands of years of silence. The object is a crystal, perfectly cut, perfectly symmetrical. It pulses faintly when exposed to heat. No explanation exists. The narrator allows the viewer to imagine the implications. A technology left behind by beings capable of altering biology. Beings who knew humanity would attempt to rediscover their origin. Beings who tried to leave instructions, warnings, and perhaps, just perhaps, a key. Key to what? That remains locked in the tombs the world has not yet found. But the narrator reveals one final truth. Every ancient culture had burial sites said to be forbidden. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. These sites were not built to honor the dead, but to protect the living from what lay within. They housed knowledge humanity was not ready to understand, bloodlines humanity was not meant to tamper with, and history's humanity was not prepared to face. As the camera pulls back from the sealed chambers, the narrator whispers, "Some tombs hold the dead. These tombs hold the past. And the past is not as silent as we once believed." Night falls like a black curtain over the ancient world. In that darkness, something begins to stir. Quietly, secretly, in the hidden chambers where kings whisper to their priests and where scrolls are guarded by trembling hands. It begins with a single word, fragile yet dangerous, etched into tablets and passed between chosen families. The return. Long before modern religions spoke of messiahs or apocalypses, ancient civilizations were haunted by a prophecy older than any scripture. It did not warn of destruction. It did not promise salvation. It foretold an arrival, an event that would shake the foundations of the human world and expose the truth buried in its blood. The narrator guides us through torchlit halls of forgotten temples where priests gathered in the dead of night to read omens. The air hums with tension. Their robes brush the floor like whispers, their faces carved with fear and reverence. They consult tablets sealed in clay for centuries, tablets no ordinary citizen was allowed to see. Upon them are carved celestial patterns, bloodline charts, instructions, and warnings. One tablet, cracked through the center, contains a line so unsettling that it was read only during eclipses. When the heavens open, the first ones shall walk again. The first ones, the Anunnaki, the architects of civilization, the teachers of kings, the watchers who guided and controlled the hybrid bloodline. They were not gods in the poetic sense. They were beings powerful, ancient, and far beyond humanity's understanding. Their departure after the flood was interpreted not as abandonment, but as a period of waiting, a cycle, a pause. A return was inevitable. The narrator's voice darkens as he brings us into the world of ancient astronomy. High priests climbed ziggurats to measure the sky with tools far more advanced than their era suggests. They charted movements of stars, planets, comets, and alignments with astonishing precision. But these maps were not meant to predict seasons or track agricultural cycles. They were countdown clocks. One temple in Sippar contained a star map carved into obsidian, its symbols representing conjunctions and alignments that occur only once every several thousand years. The map was accompanied by a chilling inscription. The gate opens when fire meets shadow. When 3 wanderers kiss the dawn, heaven's road returns to earth. Priests across cultures watched the same signs. In Egypt, the rising of Sirius marked not only the flooding of the Nile but the awakening of a cosmic cycle. In India, the Vedas speak of gods returning on chariots of fire during specific celestial alignments. In Mesoamerica, stelae depict feathered beings descending when the sky serpent opens its mouth. The narrator weaves these threads together, revealing a global obsession that cannot be explained by coincidence. These cultures, separated by oceans and time, somehow anticipated the same future event. Not a catastrophe, a visitation, but what would trigger it? The hybrid bloodline, the covenant, the rituals, the tombs. Everything pointed toward a moment when humanity would cross a threshold, not of belief but of evolution. When the spark implanted in early humans would ignite again. When those carrying even diluted traces of the ancient essence would begin to awaken abilities dormant for millennia. The narrator shifts to a dim library beneath the ruins of Nineveh, where fragments of a prophecy were reconstructed from burned tablets. The translation is incomplete, but one line stands out. When humans rise to knowledge, when they touch the fire of the heavens, the masters shall descend. Scholars once thought this meant sunlight or divine inspiration, but modern interpreters suggest something more literal: advancement, technology, exploration of the skies, humanity leaving the earth, touching the stars, doing exactly what only the gods once could. In this reading, the prophecy becomes a warning. When humanity reaches a level of intelligence that threatens to match or challenge the first ones, they will return to reassert control or guide humanity into its next phase. Which one is true depends on how one reads the final stanza. Not all shall greet them with joy. Not all shall survive the awakening. The narrator lets this line echo before guiding us deeper into the ancient fear. The priests knew the return was inevitable, but they also knew the hybrid bloodline, the key to humanity's future, was weakening, diluting, disappearing into the common population. The descendants of kings no longer carried obvious signs of their ancient inheritance. Traits that once shone brightly were now faint sparks. Yet the prophecy insisted the blood would rise again. Not everywhere, not in everyone, in a few. Those few would become catalysts for the return. The narrator shows imagined scenes of ancient priests watching children, looking for signs, the unusual eyes, the intuitive dreams, the uncanny intellect. These children were hidden, protected, or in some cases, feared. They were believed to carry the dormant essence that would awaken in the era of the return. Their blood was both gift and burden. One chilling tablet from Assur describes a ritual called the Year of the Rising Star, performed only when certain celestial bodies aligned. During this ritual, priests examined royal children, looking for a specific birthmark carved into prophecy, the mark of the gate. If such a child was found, the temple bells rang for 3 days. A king recorded during this era wrote, "My son dreams of beings with faces of light. He speaks a tongue I do not know." The priests tremble. They say the time approaches. The narrator folds this revelation into the broader tapestry. Across the world, similar stories arose. Children with strange visions, rulers with inexplicable abilities, prophets who predicted events with frightening accuracy. Ancient civilizations interpreted these occurrences as divine signs, indicators that the return was drawing near. Even the architecture reflected this anticipation. Pyramids aligned with Orion. Ziggurats pointed to stargates. Stone circles marked solstices and equinoxes with laser-like precision. These were not monuments. They were markers, beacons, coordinates, signals. The narrator turns to a more unsettling idea hinted at in the tablets. The return was not simply a future arrival. It had already happened before. The cycle was not a straight line but a loop. The gods came. They left. They returned. They departed again. Each cycle shaped human evolution in ways we cannot comprehend. The hybrid kings, the forbidden tombs, the unexplainable advances in ancient technology. All of these may be residue from previous returns. And according to prophecy, we are approaching another. The last fragment in the Heron archive reads, "When the children of clay reach the sky, when the towers of men rise higher than the mountains, when night lights blot out the stars, the first ones will remember their creation." The narrator's voice lowers to a breath. Humanity today has reached all three conditions. We have touched space. We have built towers into the clouds. We have lit the night sky until the stars are nearly forgotten. If the covenant still exists, if the hybrid bloodline still flows, however faint, and if the cosmic clock carved into ancient stone still keeps time, then the return may not be myth. It may be a deadline, a countdown, promise waiting to be fulfilled. And somewhere on this earth, the descendants of the ancient bloodline, the ones the gods marked, the priests guarded, the tombs concealed, the covenants bound, are walking unknowingly toward a destiny written before history began. The ancient prophecies spoke of signs, subtle tremors in the fabric of the world that would foreshadow a great awakening. They were not framed as miracles or catastrophes, but as distortions, ripples, patterns, echoes of a forgotten age resurfacing through cracks in linear time. And for thousands of years, these signs flickered quietly in the background of human history, unnoticed except by those who still guarded the old knowledge. But as the modern world accelerated, the signs grew louder. The narrator begins with a darkened room illuminated only by the glow of monitors. Scientists gather around screens filled with graphs, spikes, anomalies, unexplainable increases in unexplained phenomena recorded across the globe. Strange bursts of electromagnetic activity, pulses of radiation that appear and vanish faster than instruments can track. Sudden fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. At first, these events seem random, but to the ancient scribes they are familiar. One tablet from Nippur describes a shiver in the bones of the earth, a moment when the stars sang with electricity, and the priests fell to their knees, convinced the heavens were moving. Another tablet refers to a pulse of fire without flame that flickered across temple walls. Were these metaphors, or descriptions of a phenomenon that modern science is only now rediscovering? The narrator now leads us into the field of genetics, where researchers around the world have identified something unsettling. Sequences in human DNA that do not behave like typical evolutionary mutations. Sequences that appear inserted, not naturally accumulated. Sequences shared by isolated populations who had no contact with each other for tens of thousands of years. One research paper calls them genomic islands of unknown origin. Another refers to them as foreign code. In ancient mythology, these sequences were called something else entirely. The breath of the gods, the spark, the essence, the mark. And in the modern era, this spark appears to be waking. Doctors report children born with neural activity far beyond developmental norms, infants whose brain waves mimic those of adults in deep meditation, toddlers solving puzzles far too advanced for their age, individuals with inexplicable sensory sensitivity or uncanny intuition. Throughout history, such people were called prophets, seers, or chosen ones. In the modern world, they're labeled gifted, prodigious, anomalous. But the narrator highlights a chilling truth. These traits cluster statistically in specific families, specific regions, specific bloodlines. Bloodlines that trace back to the ancient kings. The narrator's voice deepens as we journey into high-security research labs where scientists analyze brain scans of individuals exhibiting rare cognitive traits. Some display unusual patterns of electromagnetic coherence, like internal harmonics. Others show synchronization across brain hemispheres that defies conventional neuroscience. One scientist whispers, almost to himself, "It's as if their minds are tuning into something external." The ancient text said the same thing in a different language. The blood remembers the sky. The narrator turns now to another phenomenon, the global recurrence of similar dreams. People across continents report visions of tall figures bathed in light, of strange symbols, of star-like structures descending from the heavens. Psychologists call it archetypal dreaming. Neurologists call it coincidence. But ancient priests would have called it awakening. Several inscriptions describe the night of many dreams, when thousands saw the same celestial visitor. Another describes the great whisper, when the mind of man met the memory of the gods. The dreams were warnings, or invitations, or triggers, as humanity pushes toward the stars, building spacecraft, sending probes beyond the solar system, deciphering the chemistry of life. These dreams increase. The narrator hints that the connection is not metaphorical. The hybrid essence, whatever its true nature, reacts to humanity approaching the cosmic threshold the ancients warned about. Technology becomes prophecy, ambition becomes signal, and the blood begins to stir. The narrator leads us into remote regions where strange artifacts have been unearthed, objects made of alloys unknown to metallurgy, shaped with precision rivaling laser cutting. Some hum faintly when exposed to heat. Others emit frequencies detectable only by advanced instruments. Similar objects appear across Sumerian ruins, Egyptian tombs, Andean temples, and forgotten sites in the South Pacific. These are not tools. They are beacons, keys, triggers that activate under conditions only the ancients understood. One artifact, discovered in a sealed chamber beneath a collapsed ziggurat, pulses with measurable electromagnetic activity every time Jupiter, Saturn, and the Sun align. Scientists cannot explain why. Ancient scribes can. 3 wanderers kiss the dawn, the prophecy said. When they align, the gate stirs. The narrator now moves into the realm of quantum physics, where cutting-edge experiments reveal anomalies identical to those described in ancient myths. Particles behaving as though influenced by unseen forces. Time fluctuating at microscopic scales. Light bending in ways standard models cannot explain. Ancient records describe beings who walked through stone, moved without sound, vanished into the air like breath. Modern science calls this quantum tunneling, dimensional resonance, phase interference. The 2 languages, mythic and scientific, are describing the same frontier from opposite ends. The narrator lowers his voice. As modern humanity approaches this frontier, the dormant legacy in human blood responds. The genetic markers begin to activate. The hybrid code begins to glow at the edges of perception. Ancient rituals, once dismissed as superstition, are revealed to be encoded instructions, methods for aligning human consciousness with the frequency of the first ones. Meditation, chanting, breathwork, astronomical timing, they were not spiritual practices alone. They were tuning mechanisms. The hybrid kings used them. The priests preserved them. Modern mystics accidentally rediscovered them. The awakening has already begun. But awakening is not always gentle. The narrator now turns to the geopolitical stage. Nations quietly conduct genetic studies on ancient DNA, searching for markers of the hybrid lineage. Secret programs track unusual genetic clusters. Covert teams recover artifacts long dismissed as curiosities. Intelligence agencies investigate individuals with extraordinary cognitive or intuitive abilities. Behind the scenes, the same obsession that once drove ancient priesthoods resurfaces. Who carries the lineage? Who are the descendants of the first ones? And what role will they play when the return arrives? The narrator paints an image of quiet desperation among the world's elite. Families tracing their ancestry, governments hiding findings, corporations funding genetic startups that promise answers they cannot publicly seek. Meanwhile, ordinary people experience subtle shifts. Dreams, sensations, intuitions, never knowing they are part of a cycle that began before civilization existed. The final part of this section becomes a crescendo. The narrator describes a world on the brink of something monumental. Not doom, not salvation, recognition. The moment when humanity finally understands that it is not alone, that it has never been alone, that the blood running through its veins is older than its species. And then, a final whisper, if the ancient cycle holds, if the prophecies align, if the signs continue to intensify, the return is no longer a distant myth. It is an approaching shadow. And the ones whose blood carries even a fragment of the ancient spark, the heirs of the forgotten kings, may be the first to feel it. There are moments in history when entire civilizations seem to change direction at once. Moments when human beings collectively awaken to something they cannot fully explain. These moments often appear in bursts. The rise of sudden genius, unexplainable leaps in technology, revolutions in thought, and strange surges of intuition that ripple through societies like invisible tides. Most historians treat these shifts as coincidence, cultural evolution, social momentum, but the ancient priests had a different word for it. Resonance. The narrator begins slowly, deliberately. The hybrid essence seeded thousands of years ago was never meant to remain static. It was designed, crafted, to respond to cosmic forces, cycles of energy, and alignments far beyond human perception. In ancient times, this resonance manifested in the kings, prophets, and chosen ones whose abilities shaped civilizations. But in the modern era, resonance appears differently. It appears everywhere, in boardrooms and classrooms, in laboratories and lonely bedrooms, in artists and scientists, in children who speak of stars they have never studied, in people who feel a longing for something they cannot name. The narrator guides us to the first major sign of collective resonance, the sudden explosion of creativity and intelligence in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Music transforms. Science leaps forward. Mathematics evolves. Technology accelerates. In a mere 100 years, humans accomplish what once would have taken millennia. It is as if something invisible pressed the fast-forward button on civilization. But the most remarkable changes are not intellectual. They are internal. People begin reporting strange sensations, premonitions, déjà vu, flashes of insight, dreams that feel like messages. Not one or two individuals, thousands, then millions, across continents, cultures, and languages. The same themes emerge. Luminous beings, ancient temples, star-filled skies, and a sense of returning to something long forgotten. Psychology dismisses these as archetypes. The narrator suggests something else. The blood remembers. The hybrid essence that lay dormant for thousands of years, buried beneath layers of dilution, neglect, and silence, is beginning to rekindle. Not in elites alone, not in priestly families or royal lines, but in ordinary people whose ancestors unknowingly carried a spark of the ancient code. It flickers in intuition, in creativity, in empathy, in a strange, restless hunger for meaning. One researcher, studying patterns of shared visionary experiences, writes, "It is almost as if the human species is tuning itself to a frequency beyond human experience." Ancient priests would call this the Great Stirring. The narrator transitions into a series of haunting images. Modern individuals, from all walks of life, experiencing moments of unexplained clarity. A mother waking from a dream knowing exactly what will happen the next day. A musician composing melodies that feel older than language. A child drawing constellations perfectly, though she has never seen a star map. A man staring at the night sky and suddenly bursting into tears, without knowing why. These events are dismissed by science as anomalies. But in the oldest temples of Sumer, clay tablets describe precisely these experiences. When the blood stirs with memory, when the children dream of light, when the hearts of men ache for the sky, the gate approaches. The gate, the celestial portal associated with the return. The same gate the temples were aligned to. The same gate carved into the forbidden tombs. The same gate mapped onto the cylinder seals and etched onto star stones buried under ruins. Resonance is not random. It is preparation. The narrator guides us to the next layer of the mystery. Synchronicity. In recent decades, more people report meaningful coincidences. Events too sharply aligned to be chance. Meeting a stranger whose story mirrors their own. Thinking of someone just before they call. Feeling guided toward certain books, ideas, or places without knowing why. These patterns were described thousands of years earlier as the pulling of threads, a sign that the hybrid essence was awakening collectively. The world begins to feel smaller, more connected. Ideas spread instantly. Cultures blend. People communicate across continents at the speed of thought. And beneath all this, a tremor runs through the human psyche, subtle but constant. A sense that something is coming. The narrator shifts into darker territory now. For every awakening, there is resistance. In ancient times, Enlil's priests tried to suppress the hybrid spark. Today, that resistance is more complex, rooted in fear, denial, and institutions threatened by change. Governments tighten control. Corporations hoard data. Elites attempt to centralize power. The more humanity awakens, the more intense the suppression becomes. Because resonance has consequences. It makes people less obedient, less afraid, more aware of deception, more connected to intuition and empathy, more likely to question authority. These traits were precisely what Enlil feared thousands of years ago. The narrator does not frame this as conspiracy, but as pattern, an ancient tension resurfacing in modern form. The hybrid essence empowers individuals, while systems built on control struggle to maintain dominance. And the conflict intensifies. The next sign of resonance appears in the rise of global movements demanding justice, equality, transparency, and truth. These movements are not driven by one culture or one ideology. They erupt simultaneously across nations, as if sparked by an unseen force. Ancient priests would say, "The blood awakens as one." The narrator now brings us to a quiet but profound shift, something happening within consciousness itself. Meditation becomes mainstream. Mysticism resurfaces. People explore altered states, not as escape but as discovery. Mass interest in near-death experiences, past life memories, energy work, and paranormal phenomena spikes. Not fringe. Mainstream. Humanity, knowingly or not, begins tapping into frequencies the ancients guarded. One scientific paper suggests that human brainwave frequencies have increased subtly over the past century. Another notes a rise in anomalous perceptual experiences. Yet another observes heightened electromagnetic sensitivity in growing segments of the population. What does this mean? The narrator leans in. Resonance is accelerating. The hybrid spark is strengthening. The bloodline is reawakening. Humanity is approaching the frequency once held by the ancient kings. And as human consciousness rises, something else responds. Lights in the sky, unexplained aerial phenomena, objects defying physics, appearing and disappearing with impossible speed. Government whistleblowers speaking of non-human intelligences. Declassified documents revealing decades of encounters. Ancient priests would not call these UFOs. They would call them watchers, the ones who observe the blood, the ones who measure the resonance, the ones who guard the covenant, and perhaps, just perhaps, the ones preparing for the return. The section builds to a powerful emotional peak. Humanity stands between two realities, one ancient, one modern, yet both intertwined in a way no one ever imagined. People feel restless, awakened, shaken by invisible forces shaping their destiny. Resonance is no longer myth. It is happening. It is growing. It is the whisper inside millions of minds telling them, "You were made for more." The narrator closes with a breath, as the camera pans upward toward a star-filled sky pulsing with silent electricity. Humanity is awakening. The blood is remembering. And the world is shifting toward a moment foretold before time was written. A moment when the heavens will open, and the past will return to claim the future. The ancient world believed there were places on earth where the sky leaned closer, where the boundary between the mortal and the divine grew thin. These places were not chosen for beauty or geography, but because they vibrated with an unseen frequency. Echoes of the gate, the cosmic threshold through which the first ones once descended. Even today, these sites carry a presence that defies explanation. High on the Armenian mountains, ancient stones form circles aligned with constellations tied to creation myths. In Giza, pyramids stand like frozen lightning, their shafts aimed at star clusters associated with divine descent. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across desert sands, giant shapes visible only from the air, as if carved for watchers who never walked the ground. These were not artistic expressions. They were coordinates. Across the world, these sacred sites lie on invisible pathways, magnetic lines that pulse with energy. Modern instruments detect strange anomalies there: radiation spikes, electrical hums, gravitational distortions. Ancient priests sensed these effects without technology. They built temples atop them. They crowned kings upon them. They performed rituals only when the stars aligned above them. These were the gate points. But one place holds more weight than the rest: Mount Ararat, the mountain of memory. Texts from Sumer to Persia claim it as the point where the old world ended and the new world began. The mountain where the bloodline survived. The mountain where the sky last opened. Now, as modern satellites detect heat signatures and geometric structures buried under its ice, a quiet understanding begins to surface. The ancients were not building myths. They were building markers. And one day, the gate they marked may open again. Dawn arrives quietly at first, as it always has. But there is something different in the way the first beams of light spill across the horizon now. Something subtle yet undeniable, as though the sky itself is awakening from a long sleep. The colors seem deeper, layered with faint hues that shimmer for a moment before fading into the ordinary glow of morning. Most people do not notice these flickers, these shifting tones that move like ripples across the sky. But a few do. They feel it before they see it. A stirring in the mind, a tremble in the chest, a tug in the soul. These individuals wake before sunrise without knowing why. They sit upright in their beds, breathing slowly, eyes unfocused as dreams slip through their fingers like sand. The dreams are always the same. Spirals of light, colossal beings of radiance standing on mountaintops. Strange symbols that pulse like living things. And a voice, not spoken but felt, whispering in a language older than memory. A language their minds should not understand, but their blood does. Across continents, in different cultures and time zones, people begin sharing these same dreams without ever speaking to one another. Children draw the same symbols on paper. Artists paint the same sky. Musicians compose melodies they insist did not come from them. The world dismisses these patterns as coincidence, imagination, or the predictable chaos of modern life. But beneath the noise, something ancient is rising. The hybrid spark, dormant for thousands of years, begins to glow again. The narrator guides us into the minds of scientists who have spent years tracking neurological anomalies, individuals whose brainwaves shift dramatically during certain astronomical alignments. During eclipses, their neural activity spikes. During planetary conjunctions, their dreams intensify. During solstices, their senses heighten. When asked to explain these events, modern science stumbles, unable to understand why the cosmos appears to influence only a small group of seemingly unrelated people. In ancient records, these individuals were called the Watchful Ones, or the Rememberers, descendants of the hybrid bloodline who would reawaken during the era of the Return. Now they are scattered across the world. Programmers in London, farmers in Ethiopia, dancers in Brazil, students in Korea. None of them know the others exist, yet all feel the same pull. A quiet longing toward the sky, a strange familiarity in ancient symbols, a sense that something is about to happen, something immense. As the narrator's voice lowers, we see modern cities waking with the same uneasy energy. Lights flicker unpredictably at dawn. Birds circle in unusual patterns. Recording devices pick up tones too low for the human ear. In remote regions, shepherds and hikers see faint, shimmering shapes hovering above mountains. Silent, reflective, gone in seconds. Governments release carefully worded statements, blaming drones, weather balloons, astronomical distortions. The ancient tablets hold a simpler explanation. When the gate begins to stir, the watchers will gather. The watchers do not interfere. They observe. They measure resonance. They trace the flickering signals rising from human consciousness. The hybrid spark draws them like a lighthouse in the fog. The more people awaken, the brighter the signal grows. The narrator takes us now into the emotional experience of the awakening. The individuals touched by the spark begin feeling deeper empathy, sharper intuition, stronger inner knowing. They sense deception instantly. They feel drawn to truth in a world of noise. They reject systems built on fear. They crave authenticity, unity, understanding. These changes ripple through their relationships, their choices, their lives. Some fear they are losing their minds. Others feel more alive than ever. The ancient texts predicted this too. When the blood remembers, the heart opens. The awakening is not mystical. It is evolutionary. It is biological. It is the ancestral memory of the first ones rising through the human soul like dawn light bleeding through darkness. As sunrise spreads across the globe, millions of people pause instinctively, drawn toward the horizon. They do not know why. They do not speak. They simply feel a vibration deep beneath the surface of consciousness, a whisper threading through the atmosphere, a sensation that something is standing just behind the veil, watching, waiting, breathing with the rhythm of the rising sun. A moment passes, soft, fragile, powerful, and in that moment, the hybrid spark flares. For the first time in ages, humanity does not look up because it fears the sky. It looks up because it remembers it. The return is no longer legend. It is the echo inside every awakening heart. In the final quiet moment of humanity's long journey, the narrator guides us to a place without time. A cliff overlooking a vast horizon where night meets day in a line of molten gold. The world beneath is silent, holding its breath. One figure stands at the edge, anonymous, ordinary, yet carrying within their veins the ancient spark that has traveled through ages of kings, floods, temples, shadows, and stars. The dawn rises slowly, painting the sky with colors older than memory. For the first time in thousands of years, the light seems to move differently, layered, shimmering, carrying a hum that resonates deep in the bones. It is not loud. It is not violent. It is recognition. Across the world, countless others pause at this very same moment, feeling something shift inside them. Not fear, not confusion, but a calm clarity, as if a forgotten truth is finally stepping out of darkness. The sky brightens, and in that golden edge of sunrise, the air ripples. A soft tremor, a breath not human, a presence stretching across the horizon like a memory awakening. The figure on the cliff closes their eyes. They do not know the names of the first ones, nor the details of the covenant, nor the ancient bloodline they carry. But they feel it, an invisible thread pulling them toward the light. The return is not a single event. It is a continuum, a remembering, a homecoming written in the oldest language of all, the human soul. As the sun lifts fully, the world exhales. The past and future align. And in the rising light, humanity stands at the threshold, not as servants of the gods, not as creatures of clay, but as the bridge between earth and sky, finally ready to see who they truly are.